Call the meeting to order. Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice. Call the meeting to order. Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay. First up on the agenda is the curriculum report regarding art. Turn that over to Dave.
Thank you very much. Tonight we'll have Ivy Wheeler and Lisa Scoyen presenting an update on the K-12 art curriculum. As we mentioned earlier, as we go through these presentations this year, we'll be highlighting the phases in the curriculum improvement process, as that is the key process and is critically important. As we go through this presentation, they'll be sharing some highlights related to the phases. They'll also share some ways that we'll be addressing our three focus areas of equity, empowerment, and alignment. And although we don't have teachers here with us tonight, they did contribute to the presentation. As you can imagine, this environment, it's hard to find time to meet with the teachers, get everything together, and prepare the presentation, but they definitely were engaged in the process. So the very first thing we're going to do is just take a quick look at our art offerings at all levels. Next slide, please. One more up. There we go. So first on the left-hand side, you can see our
Dave, you're gonna have to share. You're gonna have to share your screen, or somebody's got to share it because nobody watching is gonna be able to see this. There we go.
Got it?
Yep.
Okay. So on the left-hand side, the K-7 art required courses. K-5, they have art 2 days per week. That's a change from 18-19, a pretty significant increase in the amount of art instruction they have. In 6th and 7th grade, required 6-week exploratory. In 6th and 7th grade, they don't have electives. They have exploratories to make sure that students are exposed to all sorts of different learning experiences. And in those, they emphasize the elements and principles of design used in art. And if we look over at the grades 8, 12 art electives, this is where students start to choose, obviously, as it says, an elective. You can see all the different art electives that we have. As we go through this process, we'll be exploring new options for art courses eventually. And there is one art class up there that we're exploring a name change that I think someone in the room might be pleased to hear about. We have a course called Studio Problems, and we'll be addressing the name to address the fact that it's actually about problem solving. It's not just about problems. So we'll be looking at that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ivy and Lisa.
All right. Tim, if you could go to the next slide, please. So this year, when we are in phase 1 for art K-12, one thing that we will be looking at are the new Wisconsin standards for art and design education. They were released in 2019. And prior to that, we were using the national core art standards. So while working on phase 1 this year, we will be learning about the Wisconsin standards for art and design education and making sure that our curriculum aligns to the Wisconsin standards, while also crosswalking with the national core art standards to better understand where they're similar and where they are slightly different. So those are links that can be clicked on if you would like to look at those. Tim, if you can go to the next slide. So this is just a poster overview of the Wisconsin standards. You will see that they are broken up into 4, now the word is not here with me. Hold on one second. The four processes, the artistic processes, sorry for that. Create, present, respond, and connect. And one place that the Wisconsin standards are slightly different from the national standards is that the national standards are broken down by grade, and the Wisconsin standards take those 4 processes and break them down by grade band. And this really empowers teachers to take their content knowledge and their knowledge of students and basically develop an alignment of these indicators that best meet the needs of those students and connect them to the content, to the standards. If you go to the next slide. What you see here is what the standards and indicators look like when you go to one of those artistic processes. So here you see the process of create. The standard is students will generate, develop, and refine artistic work, which is the K-12 standard. And then you see the indicators by grade band. So for example, where students start with explore studio skills, techniques, materials, tools, and elements and principles of art and design in kindergarten, the indicator for that by 12th grade is that students engage in critical thinking, problem solving, and research through elements and principles of art and design, studio practices, and processes. So they build throughout the grade bands, but the artistic process remains the same, and the indicators are aligned so that students can have different experiences throughout K2, build on that for 3-5 to really hit that high standard by the end of 12th grade. And I will pass it on to Lisa.
Okay, an outcome for phase 1 is determining priority standards. We've used this collaborative process for all curricular areas for a number of years. In grade level teams, teachers identify through in-depth discussions those standards that meet the following specific selection criteria for readiness, endurance, leverage, and equity. After reflecting on this process through our 3 themes of the curriculum improvement process, empowerment, equity, and alignment, we recognize the need for an equity guiding question. So this is the first year that we have an equity guiding question that we will use during the priority standard process. If you can go to the next slide, please. This is a document that the committee members use to track the priority standards. You can see the indicators listed, and they ask those guiding questions for endurance, readiness, and leverage. If it meets the criteria, they place an X. After they're complete, they look for the priority standards that have 3 or 4 X's, and that would be their initial list of priority standards. And you can go to the next slide. Ivy and I asked the art teachers at all 3 levels to share highlights of their programs and shifts they have made due to COVID. So this is student art at the elementary level. You can see the different artwork that the students are creating in our elementary schools, one from EP Rock and the optical illusions from Hudson Prairie. We also have a note that one of the art teachers received from an EP Rock parent listed on here. The next slide. Just another email that one of our art teachers received from a North Hudson parent, and you can see artwork from North Hudson and from EP Rock. And finally, the last slide that I'd like to share with you are the shifts due to COVID. At the elementary level, art is the only special that includes synchronous teaching for IDL students. Students join the Google Meet for 10 to 15 minutes for instruction, and then they work independently on their art project at home. Students also have the option to choose an art activity from an IDL art menu that the art teachers create. And you can see a sample here from a kindergarten art menu, as well as a note to one of our art teachers from an EP Rock parent, an IDL parent. And also we even have an IDL art gallery in one of our elementary schools. And you can see a picture of that here on the bottom right-hand corner of the slide.
The next couple slides will highlight some of the student art at our secondary level. So this is middle school. You can see art that demonstrates student focus on elements and principles of design, such as color, form, value, movement, and proportion. And next slide, please. And here you can see student artwork from the high school, where students are building on those skills, focusing on line, texture, space, balance, and emphasis. Next slide, please. And now we'll talk about some of the shifts at the secondary level in the arts program due to COVID. Included this picture because we thought it really well represented arts in the time of COVID. You can go to the next slide, please. At the high school level in the graphic design department, some students were issued loaner laptops because some of the programs that students use, such as Adobe Illustrator and Photoshop, they could not do that on their Chromebooks. So we were able to send home some laptops for them to use so that they could participate at home. At the middle school, teachers are recording demonstrations to make them more accessible to virtual learners. Ceramics has been a really big focus to find ways that students can participate in ceramics from home. They've created more hand building projects, and when students are in hybrid, they're working on the potter's wheel when they're at school and doing their design when they're at home. And students in the sculpture and jewelry class are using some new materials, polymer clay and metallic paint, because obviously they don't have access to some of the larger tools that they would use typically in sculpture class. And that was all. Dave, I'm not sure if you wanted to wrap it up or we can open it up to questions.
I think you can go right ahead and open up to questions.
Your mic.
This is Sukatas. Thank you for looking at the high school studio special problems question that I fed to Dave, and I think he forwarded it to you. Just had a question. In terms of the high school course descriptions and under the catalog, are people like you and the work you do are not necessarily being like overseers or driving people to write better descriptions, but do departments periodically review the writing of their course descriptions and maybe even entertain a little looking over the shoulder of an English teacher or somebody, or, just for consistency? For example, in that studio special problems, it's talking about students being able to explore media, and it gave an example of collage, and then it said and then it said non-objective art. So if it was music, you would say, explore a variety of instruments, and then supposedly in the same category, you'd say like music genres, like jazz or reggae or something like that. So I don't know. I know what whoever wrote that, I know exactly what they're saying, but it needs a little fine tuning. So I don't know if we periodically have our teachers review their course outlines, but just a thought.
I think that this is probably going to be a very good year for us to be doing some of that work. I know later on the agenda, there'll be conversation about the 8-period schedule. And through that process, as we're moving forward, talking to teachers and other stakeholders, a lot of what we're doing is looking at the courses that are offered so that we can find out areas that we might need to explore. And part of that process is looking at the actual courses and the course description. So I think this will be an excellent opportunity to make sure that what it says in the course description and the name of the course line up really well. And I really appreciate your input on that and you noticing some of those areas that we might focus on.
Any other questions from board members? All right. Well, thank you very much for your report. Thank you for all the work you're putting in on establishing those standards. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Next up, we have a TAC report. I believe this is Andrea.
Yes, so thank you so much I think this is exciting to be able to talk about TAC to the board. I don't think we've in the past done it directly to the board. So thank you for the opportunity to talk about TAC. So Teacher Advisory Committee, just a quick little summary. We had a most recent meeting on September 30th. And one of the goals of these meetings is that we have a jointly developed agenda. About half of it comes from administration, half of it comes from teachers. And so again, with this last meeting, we had 16 different agenda items. And it was a shorter meeting because we were trying to fit it in at, towards the start of the school year. It didn't get through all the topics, but then we just put them to the next meeting. But what I enjoy the most about the Teacher Advisory Committee is that it's a dynamic conversation on all the different topics. I do feel that people feel comfortable sharing at those meetings. We tend to have quite lively discussions with a variety of perspectives. We've recently added Aaron Shulkin as an administrator on the committee as well. In the past, it was Dave, Tim, Nick, myself, and then with special ed issues coming up, we're like, you know what, it makes sense to have Erin at the table as well. So she was added, I think, last year. And then we've been changing committee members as people, come and go. But I do think we consistently have a vibrant group of people with different perspectives. Some of the topics that we talked about, certainly of those 16 topics, all but 5 of them were COVID related this last meeting. So certainly COVID heavy. Whether it was the matrix, whether it was staffing issues, time off issues, we delved into all of those issues quite extensively. And then we also covered things like the equity conversation, the budget, enrollment, because that really affects teachers too. And then the topic we're going to talk tonight about as well is the compensation process. So just wanted to give you a quick summary of those are the type of topics that we talk about at TAC. And again, I think then teachers tend to put on issues that they get from buildings, and they feel free to add to the agenda every time. So we usually have at least, I don't know, I would say at least 5 to 15 items from teachers added to the agenda on a regular basis as well. And since COVID last March, we've met more than usual. Some were a little quick meetings, but 5 times since last March versus up to this point, it was more of a quarterly rotation cycle. And then we also have another meeting already set again for November. So trying to use that as a consistent touch point with some of our teacher leaders.
All right. Is there any questions specifically on the TAC report? Yes, Heather.
Mr. President, thanks. Can you just remind both us and everyone watching, so the TAC, it's different from other committees in that it's a organized teacher-led committee, or how would you describe that committee compared to the many other committees that we have that engage teachers to advise administration on the work of the district?
Really good question. I've actually, the last few months, had some time to reflect on that too, because it was a committee that I inherited when I started, right? Like it's been in place since Act 10. I believe it grew out of the creation of Act 10. There was a need in the absence of the union environment to have specific teacher voice. And the way I kind of look at it is that it has become HR heavy, which is why I think I'm kind of, taking the lead on a lot of the topics, because it does tend to be those issues that aren't teaching and learning specific, or that aren't calendar specific, where there are subcommittees or educator effectiveness or specific committees like that, where there's already committee work going on. We don't want to undermine that. And we have had more conversations and with leadership too about we have to, make sure that we let those committees do that work. This is a different type of committee, which is why I think COVID's so heavy on that. And like compensation and the leaves and stuff like, and handbooks. Handbook is a regular workflow item with this teacher advisory committee as well, because it's definitely in lieu of bargaining, in lieu of, or the, after Act 10, it was kind of the vehicle that we could communicate directly at the building. So there's teacher representatives from every building. We have about 15 teachers throughout the district represented on this committee.
Thank you.
And Andrea, I was just wondering if you could address when it comes to the concerns being raised and discussed at that meeting. I'm assuming that there's some topics that don't need to come to us as a board, because they're just things that the administration can respond to and work collaboratively with the teachers regarding. But then there may be other items that are policy driven that would, where your answer to the teachers has to be, well, that will require some board action because we need a policy change. And just give me some sense for the last couple meetings, how many of those topics would fall into one of those two categories, percentage wise?
Right now I would say over 80% right now is COVID. And so a lot of it was the blueprint that the board was responsible, that the board had approved, as well as the matrix that was going to be another discussion item tonight. So there is quite a bit of overlap. And so then when it gets to those type of topics, we do talk to TAC about the fact that it's a board expectation, or it's a board, it's a board decided issue that we are implementing, and we're trying to give them information and some of the whys behind it as well. But if there's changes that can be made, sometimes it gets a little tough, especially when we're dealing with COVID issues. So I would say a lot of the conversation last time was about, the matrix and, what should the matrix look like? I think we spent almost an hour just diving into the details of the matrix. So I don't know if that exactly answers your question, but it's definitely in the past, I would say it's much more like the type of topics are the use of sick leave is one that we always talk about. Should we start having conversations about limiting the use of personal days, or should we, what are we going to do about the sub shortage? What are we going to do? And that's where it's more dynamic and what I call the meatier topics that we can have more robust conversation about, versus the things that sometimes, whether it's federal law, whether it's, the COVID pandemic that nobody wanted to have to deal with, some things we just have to deal with and process. And so I think it's just been heavier in that realm as of late.
All right. And so when is the next meeting for TAC?
November, beginning of November, I think, I believe the first Tuesday, the second Tuesday in November, but I got to double check on that because
Okay.
we're bouncing back and forth between a couple dates.
Very good. Any other questions then?
Mr. President,
Yes, Carrie.
so tonight, Andrea, just looking at the agenda, when we discuss the potential change to the matrix compensation and the high school potentially going to 8 periods, will you be sharing what the TAC's discussion was or recommendation on those topics? Or would this be the time to bring that up?
I would defer to Nick a little bit on that one. I don't think because I think there's been a lot of development on the matrix that that has occurred since September 30th. We haven't had a meeting since then. So I don't know. I don't have anything specific to share out from the TAC committee, but I'm hearing what you're saying is that if we can be doing that, that would be great. I think we just haven't had a meeting since September, and I think there's been, I don't know, Nick, there's been a lot of changes.
Yep. We talked about changes to the matrix back on the 30th of September, presented changes to the board on the 14th on the 12th of October, which the board at that time said, let's hold off. So no, we haven't met to talk about it. As far as the 8-period day at the high school, that's really not a TAC type of discussion. That's a conversation that high school administration would be having with high school staff. It would not be something that would rise to the level of TAC because it only impacts the high school. As far as the salary recommendations, at the time, September 30th, when we had our last meeting, we didn't have any more data than we did prior to that. We just, the new salary recommendations have just been since we've gotten data since the September 30th. But it's not a collective bargaining situation. This isn't a go back and forth type of situation. It is an opportunity for people to bring things to the group and for the administration to kind of bounce things off of TAC. But we just want to make sure people understand this is not collective bargaining where we go back and forth the way it used to be pre-Act 10.
I would say though, like with the adjustments, so we're doing part 2 tonight. We had discussed part 1 last time. That was a function of whether it was the teachers at TAC or whether the teachers emailing me or conversations. That has been dynamic for years in terms of dialogue. So I did mention that specifically when I gave them the compensation update at our last September 30th meeting, is that I would be presenting proposals to the board to address that. And they were very happy with that. And so, that has been a regular agenda item. This group has been a regular agenda item on TAC for years.
Any other questions? Otherwise, thank you for the report. Look forward to your next report at the November work session then, if your next meeting for the TAC is November. So, all right, now we move on to discussion and action items. And I just want to note, we'll make a slight change unless our superintendent tells me something I need to know different. But I was thinking of putting the monthly finance update to D, basically switching, moving B to D, and then moving C and D up, so that we talk about the monthly financial update after we have our matrix discussion. Is that all right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So let's move on now to the equity curricular petition. This is on our agenda, and I want to confess an oversight on my part. We had this petition was presented to the board. I believe it was it was late August. I remember having an email exchange over Labor Day weekend and indicating that the petition would be discussed by the board at an upcoming work session. And then when we had the September work session, between the COVID updates and our other work, as well as just the general, working on the budget and the levy and all that stuff, that it slipped my mind. So it didn't, I got reminded right after the meeting was over, we forgot to put that on. And so I apologize for that, but this is our next work session. And so it's on, this is basically the body of the petition is 3 pages with requests, that the board take action item on. There's 9 requests. And I know that a lot of this talks about curricular items. So I thought maybe the best way to kick off that part of it would be to turn over to Dave. And then if you've got some comments to address to that as far as what's been done to date and what is being planned to be done.
You bet. Thank you very much for that. So first of all, I just want to thank the organizers and the signers. It's important to get feedback from the community. This is a great avenue to get feedback. It was very direct. It was very specific, and that's always helpful when receiving feedback. Many of the ideas that were shared in the petition align directly with either a direction we're already heading or a direction that we need to head. There was nothing in the petition that we said, well, that's just something that we're not going to address. It really seemed to be aligned to where we were heading. I would describe a lot of what was in the petition as sort of highlighting areas that we know we need to focus on. But again, it's helpful to get that feedback. It's helpful to be reminded that we need to move these efforts forward. I'm also confident that when we do engage in the work with an equity consultant and have an equity audit, that will shed further light on an appropriate roadmap to take to address some of these items that need to be addressed. One of the things that we think about quite a bit when we talk about curricular changes is the pace at which curriculum moves. So I want to just highlight 3 different terms that are all sort of interrelated. So curriculum generally describes the what of education, the what we teach, the scope and the sequence, the things that need to be included. Instruction describes the things the teachers do to make sure that curriculum is taught. And then there's professional learning and professional development, which is sort of the another supporting concept within there, that it's not just here's the curriculum and this is what you need to do. We also need to support teachers with ongoing professional learning opportunities. And many of the topics in here touch on those different areas variously. Ultimately, it all points to a common goal, and that is to create a more equitable 4K through 12 learning experience for all of our students. I'm just going to touch on a few of the items, talk a little bit about what we are doing or what we know that we will need to do as we move forward. So one of the questions on there was challenging ourselves to integrate Black history and American history, and it goes on with some detail. And they're absolutely right. That's something we need to do a better job of doing. We need to make sure that when we're talking about history other than European history, that we're not always comparing an other experience. We have to talk about the experience in and of itself. So African American history, as an example, should not always be compared to how does that relate to white American history. There is value in exploring African American history on its own terms, and we also need to make sure, and this was mentioned later, that we don't do that in a way that really is more of a token to including other perspectives. It needs to be integrated. So to number one, that's just a yes, absolutely. The second point was on teaching various cultures within the Native American population. And that is something not only that, yes, we must do, it's actually a legal mandate. Act 31 requires in the state of Wisconsin that we teach of the Native American sovereign nations in our area. And we've had several people go through training through CISA. Lisa Scoyen, who you just met earlier, went through training. Actually, Nick went through training at CISA on that as well, as did Amy Wise. So that's something we feel very well prepared to address and improve as we move forward. One of the questions has to do with making sure that we have inclusive and diverse stories embedded throughout our curriculum. And that absolutely also is true. We talk about the fact that we want all of our students to see themselves reflected in the curriculum, all students. And we're getting great praise from teachers about our Fontes and Pinnell classroom resource that was adopted because of the diverse literature that is included. That's one thing I wanted to mention. You know, there are times when we might bring an administrative initiative forward that teachers are going, oh, here we go. Equity is not one of them. Teachers are overwhelmingly on board and excited to address these equity issues. It's something they really want to get after. So that's always fun and rewarding when we know we're supporting a direction that teachers want to go. Another question related to teaching world history and making sure that when we do that, we're, again, not engaging in tokenism and that we're exploring other cultures in a meaningful and authentic way. There will be some more adjustments to course titles that will help clarify where this actually happens. As an example, we have a class that all freshmen take called World Connections. Well, it's a world history course, but it doesn't say that. So someone looking at the course catalog might say, you know what, it looks like our high school students never get a class in world history. And it's there, it's just named in a way that might not be crystal clear. So we're going to be making some changes that way. Issue 5, I thought was very well said. I'm going to read the entire question, and you know many people signed the petition, but it says, teach about historical struggles, triumphs, challenges in the context of what's happening from many different perspectives and how these historical events influence current events. If students don't see the relationship between then and now and the historical context of current events, they'll lack the fundamental understanding and empathy. If you remember when we did our curriculum improvement process update, we talked about the fact that we also want to help give kids tools to address inequities. It's not just about learning. It's about developing skills and tools to address inequities that they see in their everyday life. That question was just very well said, and we take that feedback to heart. There are a few other items. I'm going to pass it over to Erin. Actually, they relate more to the student service side of things.
So I just want to echo what Dave said as well. And I think this feedback is really important and helps us to be really reflective, and also gives us an opportunity to share the things that we are doing to try to work towards these things. And so one of the things that came up through this petition was that idea, that staff development piece, and some of it related to bullying and student mental health. And so those are things that we're always working to strive for. When we say all means all, that's what we mean. And we do want to leverage diversity and make sure all students feel valued and connected. Some of the work that we started last year called Building Culturally Responsive Systems through the RTI network. So we had a group of administrators, counselors, and teachers working working on that last year, and we were exploring a model to explore or to inform our work and priorities in culturally responsive practices. Staff were able to explore personal and implicit biases using Project Implicit from Harvard University. We'll be continuing that work with the RTI Center to continue to improve our system and ensure that students feel accepted, seen, and empowered. Another thing that we're doing is working specifically to address student connectedness and that sense of belonging, as was evidenced in our youth risk behavior survey data. So through advisory, our mental health teams, and increasing social emotional learning across all grade levels. So working with teaching and learning to kind of map out our social emotional learning competencies, similarly as we would to all grade level standards in any academic area, to make sure that we are hitting those areas for all students. Any questions?
Okay. Other questions then regarding the petition? Yes, President.
Mr. President, I'm going to go first. I had my finger on the button. No, thank you. I think that David hit on a very important perspective, and maybe I've only learned it recently, but the whole idea of repositioning yourself to not be like I'm white, looking at the other, but looking at we're all the other in some way. So it isn't like I think I remember saying once, oh, on Martin Luther King Jr. Day, I heard somebody talking about Plessy versus Ferguson in the classroom in 5th grade. Yay, you know, but see, that's still looking at that as like, look what we did and beat your chest. So I'm glad that we're moving to that other perspective. And of course, I'm a great admirer of the Yarbus report, because I think we had so much, we haven't heard it all yet, but we had so much data there that really was kind of like cold water on you, the realities that came out of that survey. But I just want to say that when we had the group speak to us with Addison Miller's group speak to us in the auditorium, I went home thinking that we're going to be spending money on a equity audit. And here we had the most fantastic, focus group without even planning to have a focus group. And we had a great diversity of experience and variety of experiences of parents and youth speaking to us. I hope we can recapture that when we finally start doing the audits and having small groups speaking to us and sharing their ideas. I did a summary also of what Addison's petition said, so I'm glad that you went through that, David. I just want to quote something that was in it that I thought was really good. Let's see, roll up here. In her writing, she said, this was a thrust of it: by ensuring students feel safe, secure, seen, and empowered to achieve. I think that's a real encapsulated goal.
All right. Thank you. Rob?
Thank you, Mr. President. And so with regards to the petition, I had an opportunity to speak to the author of the petition briefly. And just a couple quick things with regards to the diverse literature. How diverse are we talking? Because certainly one person's perspective on what diversity is might be different than another's.
That's a great question. And actually that is somewhat codified in policy. So policy 330 on curriculum adoption and resource materials spells it out. So I'll read a statement in there that is in procedure 330.1. So I think it hits on some of the major points. The language is a little bit outdated, but I think it addresses the big issue. So resources should be chosen to reflect cultural diversity and the pluralistic nature of American society, provide up-to-date and accurate information presented from multiple perspectives and viewpoints, making all reasonable efforts to be nonpartisan and free from bias and stereotyping. And it goes on to talk about the fact that obviously we need to be developmentally appropriate. So I don't know if we can answer the question how diverse, because it should be as diverse as our student population.
Right.
But the depth to which you address issues, we need to make sure that it's reasonable and developmentally appropriate.
Perfect. And so just one comment and then the last question. Certainly as it relates to music being diverse, that's important. We could always do better, but I would like to give credit to our high school choir department, at least as a start. Miss Heisler, Mr. Hayes, I've been to, I think, every choir concert that I can remember because my kids are involved. Maybe there needs to be more, but there's certainly diversity in African-American music and other music. Again, certainly an opportunity to do more, certainly. And maybe there needs to be more of a focus at the elementary level. Back to my conversation with the author, the one thing that really stuck with me from our conversation was the discussion on microaggressions. Just little kids playing with other little kids, not knowing any better, but touching other little kids' hair. Teachers not being able to pronounce a child's name and repeatedly making those mistakes. And I think if there's a way for us to make those little corrections, it might mean a lot to certain parts of our community.
All right. Bruce?
Yeah, just want to say thanks again for addressing this today. And I think, some of the discussions that we've been having thus far are a start, right? And there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. And I also think as board members, we're here to provide direction, guidance, counsel, look at policy, right? Provide guidance on policy and certainly challenge the cabinet, the administration, the district to, be the best and provide what we can for our kids. So when you think about some of the actions that we're going to be taking here, providing the guidance to say, yes, as a board, as a district, we want to continue to move forward with this. It's still really up to the cabinet, and the administration, along with the teachers, to kind of take the mission and drive it forward, right? So I think it would be helpful in some of the reports that, we're able to get updated on, to come back and talk about what sort of changes, what are you looking at for books, because you don't have all the answers there right now. So what are those meaningful changes that are going to be put in place that are going to drive change for the future, right? Across the entire spectrum that we're looking at. So whether that's in classrooms, whether that's with books, whether that's across the variety of spectrum when it comes to equity, I think just having the right way to provide updates back to us at the board level, so we understand what are those changes once you're kind of taking the mission forward, will be helpful, because I think it will be interesting, one, for us to see that, but two, just create that mindfulness as you're thinking about what changes you are making, and that you're bringing this back on a regular basis to share with us. Because even like curriculum changes, we might know about a class that you're going to be adding here or there, but it's not often that we're getting a chance to kind of deep dive into each of those classes. Oftentimes we probably hear about it more from our kids or talking about it with other parents than we are maybe as likely to discuss it, in a work session or something like that. So I appreciate you continuing to kind of take the charge forward. And I think as a board, we've been very supportive of finding ways to integrate the discussion, but also, again, bring meaningful change.
We appreciate that, and that's helpful guidance.
All right. Any other comments? Yes, Heather.
Yeah, just wanted to follow up on that. I think along those same lines, I know some of what I heard, at least from the folks who spoke at that last session, was I think a request to deal with some low-hanging fruit, or maybe some things that don't rely on a 6-year curriculum cycle. And so I think likewise, as you are looking at ways that you can provide some immediate support to students, I think it would be great for us as a board to hear about, even though it's not something that requires board action, but just because it is such an important topic and we're hearing about it, to hear some of those success stories that are things that you're implementing on the administrative side. I think that would be, I know for me, that would be helpful to know that we're not just saying, yes, wait, we'll get there, that there are some things that we're able to take action on and address more quickly. Thank you.
Yes, Bob.
Yes, from talking with some of the people that spoke at the meeting, I know that there seems to be an urgency of getting some results to the senior class right now. And obviously with curriculum, it takes a little longer. And I think there's the low-hanging fruit thing. Yes, I think there is an opportunity, things that felt good that I already knew we were already addressing a lot of the things that were coming up. And I didn't want it to look that we were resistant to change. And is our political culture right now, especially here locally, some of these groups are getting in the news a little bit, and I don't want that to take off the focus of where we're going. And from the folks I talked to, they're certainly willing to work within our system to make meaningful change without making it contentious. So, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And just to address that a little bit, and to Heather's point, when I talked about curriculum versus instruction and versus professional learning, the instruction and professional learning, we can get after that in a more immediate sense. I think that's where we can see some quick movement in the right direction.
And I think we just want to highlight, and Aaron went through a lot of those things that we are already currently doing, that we aren't waiting on.
We can't hear you, Nick.
Can you hear me better now?
Yeah, if you get close to the mic.
I just want to reiterate, part of what Erin gave in her report was things that we are currently doing and that we're not waiting on. And so I think, if people were kind of listening to some of the trainings that we've talked about, that we've already started, trainings that started before, they've been happening over the last year, and trainings that are going to continue to happen with our staff. So I think it's important for people to understand that we don't want to sit and wait. Our goal is not to have this take a long period of time. It is to try to look at what are some things we can do in the short term. What are some things that long term we can make some improvements on? Now, everybody may not agree on what those things are, and that's fine. Everybody's entitled to their opinion on those things. But I would say that what Dave and Aaron and the entire team and principals and everybody that's working on this, everybody is taking a sense of urgency to this. And I think we will continue to kind of give you updates. I think the interesting piece, even the curricular piece, Dave has really made sure that we have that equity lens that's included into a lot of our curricular conversations and discussions and things along those lines. So I think a lot of this will continue to build on what we're already doing, but there has been a lot of work done, but there's also a long ways to go. So really looking forward to being able to have an assessment or an audit of where we're at, and then also help us kind of create a roadmap of where we need to go long term, because we do want systemic change, and we want things that are going to be good for all kids in our district. So we do appreciate the board asking the questions and people bringing these things up. So thank you very, very, very much for that.
All right. Anything more on the petition? All right. And again, I want to thank the organizers of bringing these items forward and, working with us as we, try to improve and do our students the best education they can get. All right. I'm going to move on to, we're going to put the monthly financial update after the school matrix. Leading into the school matrix discussion will be the COVID-19 response update. And Nick, if you can, I don't know if you've got a megaphone there, but if you can amplify, it was just all I could do to try and hear you. So I don't know if we've got any volume indicators that we can increase or anything.
Hopefully, is this helping at all? Because I haven't changed my setup since we had the expulsion meeting, and I thought everybody could hear me fine there. So I don't know if something's been adjusted on the other end. I can't hear
top of your voice as much as you can.
Okay. So as we get ready to kind of talk about the COVID operational update or kind of response update, really just a couple things we're going to touch on prior to heading into the matrix.
Say, Nick,
Yeah.
I think we'll just see if we can do anything from our end here, because the louder you talk, it does get a little more volume, but we get more distortion. And so now we're can't hear what you're saying. We can hear you're saying something, but we don't know what you're saying.
No, I understand that. Let me see if there's something else on my end. I mean, it looks to me like my mic.
I think he's got the speaker cranked as high as it goes.
So I just check it. I'm just going to test my mic again.
Yeah, like I was straining just to hear Rob, and he's only 10 feet away from me. So
Okay, so it's something on your end because when I
Okay.
test the mic and when I look at what people can hear on the recording, it is coming in crystal clear.
And from my end, I can hear everything really well. So
isn't there a commercial like that where the guy's on the train and he's talking about like his?
So Andrew is remote.
I did
and
a
I'm
search
rem-
for
and
divorce
Andrew, you
lawyers
can
the
hear
other
everything
day,
I'm
and-
saying.
yeah, very well.
So for the recording, so it's got to be something that's going on at the district office with the speaker.
Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you crystal
Yeah,
clear.
she certainly could. But,
Okay.
so
Didn't
Nick,
know.
everybody's hearing you fine at home, just not here.
Yeah, why don't we get this figured out before we move on, because this is probably
That's
a
better.
part of the meeting that is I'm sure we have quite a few people watching the meeting online, and I'm sure they're going to want to hear what we are talking about. So we want to make sure that we have it figured out. Are you able to hear me any better now?
Yeah, it is better. Go ahead.
Okay. And Andrea, you're still able to hear me all right? Okay, great. So with the COVID operational update, there's just a couple things we're going to touch on before we get into the school closure matrix, because that's really the bulk of the conversation right now, and that's where some of the data will be presented. So what I'm going to talk about, or actually I'm going to turn over to Andrea. There's just a couple things we want to touch on, just as it relates to staffing and a couple of things that were going on. If you remember back when we started talking about COVID, one of the things I told you, the biggest concern I have, or what I think is our biggest Achilles heel, is going to be staffing. It's going to be our ability to keep our building staffed through any of our challenges. And it may or may not be related to actual positive cases out, but it may be related to close contact quarantines and things along those lines. So I'm going to turn it over to Andrea, and she's going to give you kind of a little bit of talking a little bit about staff working from home, and then kind of updates on where we're sitting with the current situation.
Yep. So at the beginning of the year, I was feeling quite positive because the month of September and most of October, we had some unfilled vacancies, but mostly hourly staff vacancies. We've signed up over 60 subs since the start of the school year. So I think that some of those recruitment efforts have been successful, but unfortunately we've been having a spike the last few weeks, and certainly this weekend, in terms of staff out. So now, to give you a little bit of a flavor, we've gone from about maybe 30 people out per day in mid-September, early October, to we had 70 today. So 70 out, 43 of whom are COVID related. So it is definitely taking a big impact. We had 10 unfilled positions today. There's some departments where it's hit worse than others. And so we're trying to problem solve that. We're trying to be adaptable. We knew that this would be a challenging year. And HR, we're doing our darndest to, keep it staffed. But going into the cold and flu season, we send out an all staff email today, just reminding staff, we got to maintain social distancing. We got to, even when you're having lunch, you need to have 6 feet apart. Otherwise you can't have lunch together, right? Like we're trying to be very careful and not put ourselves in positions where we have groups of 10 people going out for a close contact to someone who ends up being positive. But we're also learning. We've learned a lot since the beginning of the year. I'm hopeful that we'll continue to work on this. I think a big hurdle has been that we're going to be doing the close contact analysis too for staff, more so than public health. So just trying to get our heads around all these different areas. But we're hopeful that we'll keep our head above water, keep those buildings open. That's the goal. And then when it comes to virtual teaching, we had a handful of people at the beginning of the year who were quarantined. That's the most typical situation, is we're letting people work or teach virtually if they want to, if they're on like a quarantine type of situation and they feel healthy enough to work. we're problem solving that. We went from a few at the beginning of the year wanting to utilize that option to, I think I had about 15 requests this weekend. If they could start doing either working from home or teaching from home. So we're trying to be creative problem solvers there and enable that opportunity for our staff as well, which will hopefully help the whole staffing situation.
So a couple of things just to clarify. So the 43 people that we have out related to COVID, those are not 43 positive staff cases. Those could be for a variety of reasons.
Variety of reasons. I didn't want to be specific as to any particular reason, but it runs the gamut of everyone who may only be gone a day a week to care for a child because of another district being hybrid and needing to be home for them, to a quarantine, to, you know, symptomatic, to, and we only have a handful of positive people.
So, you know, those are, and just to put some perspective on some of the numbers, because, you know, a lot of times we will get asked, what, you know, why don't we hire full-time subs? Why don't we do some of these things? And I think that the thing is to keep in mind that, as Andrea said, you know, 70 people out, you said today. You know, we've had days last year where we had up to 180 people out, staff members out. So when people start asking, why don't you hire 1 or 2 full-time subs? That's kind of a drop in the bucket. And a lot of times what ends up happening is you end up hiring the subs that you take them out of the sub pool. They just become actually permanent employees. And so, so it is a challenge, and staffing is going to continue to be a challenge. And, you know, the piece with the asking to work remotely, it's not just people. We're not having that conversation with people that are saying, I don't want to work at work anymore, and now I want to do it remotely. It is people that have been quarantined at home related to a COVID situation, and they're asking to do their work. They're asking to do their work remotely, so that they don't have to take, you know, burn through sick leave and things like that. So, and I will say I've gotten a couple emails from people that said they can hear me just fine on the broadcast. So I'm not sure what's happening. Hopefully they get it. We have it fixed at the district office, but and I can hear Andrea just fine. Any questions about kind of that? That was really our update, you know, related to operational, because we're going to really be spending most of our time talking about school closure matrix, which is coming up.
Go ahead, Heather.
So Nick or Andrea, I do have a question. I know, because I did hear there was a school in central Wisconsin that had to close due to staffing issues. If that happened, would it be like it's Monday and we're closing school today because of all the staff who are out? Or would we run school with minimal staffing and give parents a few days notice? Or how would that likely roll out if we were to have a time when we could not safely keep a school open?
And I would say that we're so closely monitoring every day. I mean, I'm in there every day. Holly Butler's in there every day looking at the numbers. We haven't even been close. So I don't want people to worry about that. I mean, yes, we've had unfilled positions, but we also have, and we've been working closely with Learning Support Services, that we have a good flow in terms of who fills in for different positions. You know, so I don't want people to be worried. I didn't mean to overemphasize that, is that we are still in the game, and we are still, our goal is to maintain staffing. And so we're far away from not being able to staff the buildings. But if we would be in that situation, I would say that we would know about it leading up to it, just because we have such great communication with the nurses, with our employees, letting us know really quickly if a situation's arising, that we'll understand that dilemma with at least some notice, I would assume, because it'll be building over time. To me, it wouldn't be all of a sudden, 30 people out and we can't open a building. Like, I would think that we would do a lot of problem solving. Like, we have some of my staff in my department working at another building for a week to help support. So there's a lot of options there, a lot of creativity that can occur before we would even have to go down that road.
Great, thank you.
And, a couple of things I'd be remiss didn't take an opportunity to talk about. We had the biggest increase to our sub pool this year. Isn't that what you said, Andrew? We had over 60 people added to our sub pool this year. We did lose quite a few, but we did raise our sub pay to $200 a day. I know we have about 350 people watching the meeting right now. One of the things I would stress to parents or community members that are watching is, if they have the ability to sign up and sub for us, contact the district office. If you have a 4-year degree, we can get you sub-certified. Even if you're only available 1 day a week, or anything like that, I think those things help.
And even if they don't have a 4-year degree,
even if
you
they
can
don't
still
have
be a classroom supervisor, because we are doing so much more virtual teaching at home. So I will take the opportunity to, Amanda Lloyd in my office is wonderful to work with in terms of getting you signed up quickly, figuring out which area you're best suited for. Is it the teacher sub license, or is it a classroom supervisor situation? And then getting you on the road to getting in the classroom. And there's trainings available. We have lots of different vehicles so that you can feel comfortable going into a classroom and either supervising or teaching.
All right. Any other questions related to kind of that staffing? It's really kind of a focus on staffing today.
Looks like we have no more questions. I guess we're ready to roll into the school matrix proposal.
All right. Well, I'm assuming that some of the guests that we have watching the video or watching the presentation have an interest in this next part of the conversation. A couple things I want to touch on is, as we look at our school closure matrix, and when we developed the original matrix, as I talked about 2 weeks ago, when we were all at the high school, is we developed this matrix at the end of July, first part of August, to try to put together something that gives parents something to kind of look at and see, okay, if things get to a certain level, what can I anticipate? What can I expect? To the best of my knowledge, there aren't any other districts on this side of the river that have a matrix like this. A lot of them will say, oh, we're looking at this data, and we're looking at this data, and we're looking at this, but most of them have not gone down the path of having a school closure matrix. And so we really wanted to have this out there so that people could see what is going on. You have to also remember that when we were putting this together, we did not have a tremendous amount of data as to what happens when schools open, and the impact schools play on spread and what we're going to see in buildings. Because when we originally developed the school closure matrix, we just didn't anticipate a situation where we would have a lot of high numbers in the community and not have really, really high numbers in the buildings. That just wasn't on our radar. And so now, as we're about 8 weeks into the school year, and we have some data to kind of look at how we're doing in the buildings, but also, been trying to follow some of the national stories and what's going on around the country, and also what's been going on in Europe for the summer, because Europe has been having school in the summer. Trying to see, okay, what is the role that schools are playing on this? There is, right now, there's no real definitive evidence one way or the other. There's nothing that is going to tell us for sure that schools can be open and we don't help, or we don't create and make the problem worse. And we don't have any evidence or definitive evidence that say by us being open, we make it's better. And so it really is a challenging situation. Because everybody wants to be able to kind of hang their hat on this piece of data or that piece of data. And so, a lot of it is looking at what is happening in our buildings, looking at what's happening in other school districts, looking at what's happening in the county, and trying to take that information and evaluating it and applying what we would consider pragmatism to it, and trying to figure out, okay, what's the best way to go about this? Some of the stuff is trial and error, and people may not want to hear that, but it really is, because we don't quite know what the impact is. We've had some interesting numbers, and I think I should be able to share my screen. Hold on one second here. Okay. Can you guys all see my screen? It's just a small Excel spreadsheet. Yes. Anybody? Bueller? Okay, thank you. So just a couple of quick data points. So since the start of school, looking at, pulling the information from public health, we've had 35 cases at the high school, 7 at the middle school, 23 at the elementaries. Now, there were some cases that we did count at the beginning of the school year that actually started before the first day of school. So these would be cases that started after we've started school. So this is, as we look at it. And then as you look at this also, you can see how many close contacts we've had as it relates to the different amount of cases. I will say that what is interesting as we look at this data is as we've gone to hybrid at the high school and 7th and 8th grade at the middle school, I guess 10 through 12 and 7th, 8th grade at the middle school, the amount of close contacts that we have when we do have positive cases has reduced. And so, that is definitely a pro of being in the hybrid because we're able to get kids more spread out, as we go through things. Currently, as we look at active cases, we are sitting with 12 active cases in the district right now. We picked up, I think it was 6 active cases over the weekend. And so we almost are starting to call it COVID Sunday. That's when we start getting a ton of emails from public health and calls from public health. I don't know if all the tests are coming back on Sundays or what, but probably parents are starting to realize too, they get probably a lot more emails from the school district, either Sunday night or Monday morning as we're working through some of these things. And, as we look at some of this data, if we look at what I presented to you back on the 12th, we had 47 cases. So we're up about 18 cases in the last 2 weeks, 18, 19 cases in the last 2 weeks. So we're up about almost 100 close contacts as you look at it. Hold on one second. There's another piece of data I want to share with you before we get into the actual matrix. Here it is. So this is a piece of data. Hopefully everybody can see my screen again. And let me see if I can't blow this up a little bit so people can see it a little bit better. So essentially, what I've done at the top here is we looked at, okay, how many cases have we had in each of the buildings and what time frame did we have them and where were they at? And you can kind of see across the bottom here, we've had a total, like I said, of 65 cases. You can see in each 2-week period how many new cases we've had. And you got to remember on the 10/28, that's the reporting that's going to happen on Wednesday. We still have tomorrow to go. So we don't have the data in obviously for tomorrow because tomorrow hasn't happened. So that number could increase from 19. But you can kind of see where our cases are at and how many cases we've had in the different buildings and as we go through this. And this is since the school year has started. So I just want to make sure we're upfront with people. This is not, we did have cases this summer. We did have some cases that started before school started and then carried into the start of the school year. But these would be cases since the start of the school year. A lot of times what happens with the school closure matrix, a lot of people have a question about the percent positive and how do we calculate that number and where are we getting that? And people are saying, I'm struggling to understand that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to slide up here and just kind of show you what we do to calculate that. Sorry. What we do with this is, as you can see, what we have is when we have a new case in a building, it counts as a case every day until that person is able to come back to school. So there may not be any cases. So for example, on 9/2, September 2nd, at the high school, we had no new cases on that day. However, we were still counting a positive case from a previous day. And what we're looking at for the percentages, and this is what kind of people are wondering, okay, how do you get your percentages? Is we're in the current matrix, what we're looking at is what is the percentage of kids out or staff out, because it's kids or staff in the building that are tied to, that are positive. And so when you figure, at the high school, we're saying the total number at the high school is 2,070 people. That's all of our staff and our students that are in that building. And you can see the different numbers down the street or down the right-hand side here. One thing that people have to remember is they often say, how could these percentages be so low? Well, when you have multiple days where you don't have any active cases in a building and you start averaging in zeros, it really drops that number. And I think because again, we're trying to look at on average over the 14 days, what percentage of kids and staff are out as it relates to being positive for COVID. And so This is the 916 count. The 930 count, you can start to see at the high school, start having some more cases. You can see the active counts as we go through. And this is the numbers that are reported out. A lot of times people will say, why don't you just put this information out? Well, the biggest reason why is it takes an explanation to understand what this chart is and what it's given you. If we look at the high school on line 72, we're not having 3 new cases every single day. On Wednesday, on Wednesday the 16th, we had 1 new case. On the 17th, we didn't have any, but we still had 3 positives out. On Friday, we had 3 positives out. But on Monday, we had 4 new cases over the weekend / Monday. And somebody says, well, 3 + 4 is 7. Well, it could be because one of the other cases was allowed to come back to school. And so there's no effort here to try to not be transparent or to not count everything. It's just, that's how we went through this process. And as we looked at that, it created these percent averages, percent positive outs and where we were sitting. And, one of the things that came up, and as you know, in 1014, and I go down here, and as we look at Holton, there was a conversation that we didn't go strict to the matrix because they went over 1%. And we chose, because they're at 1.06, we chose to actually leave them in school. Because what we were seeing is we were seeing really minimal new cases. And what was happening is when we started to look at the next couple of days at Holton, you can kind of see what's happening in the building. Our active cases are starting to be able to come back to school, and we're not seeing new cases. So now here we are today, Monday the 26th. The last new case Holton had was on the 15th of October. And so, it's not perfect. It is trying to look at some of these trends and trying to not have a knee-jerk reaction, but to really try to kind of look at what is the trend on some of the stuff. One of the things that public health is telling us consistently is, look at averages, because they help smooth out any anomalies in the data, as we look through, some of these components. What I think is interesting today, you look at the high school, we went basically almost a full week with maybe 1 new case. And then today, over the weekend and today, we had 5 cases at the high school. So as you can see, things are kind of dynamic. They can change as we go through this. So that creates some challenges, I know, for people with the percentage. So what we decided to do, or what we looked at doing, is, we had a lot of conversation with the board, and we've had conversation as administrative team is there something that we could do with the matrix that would make it a little bit less confusing as far as that percentage down the left-hand side. So let me pull us up.
Hey, Nick,
Yeah.
while you're doing that,
Mhm.
a new case at the high school could also include a student that is distance learning, correct? Because we do count those.
Yes, and so we have actually had quite a few cases that we do count, even though they've never really been in the building. I don't have that information off the top of my head for you, and some people say, well, why are you counting distance learners when they're not in the building? And the biggest reason why is because at any point those distance learners could come to school. It's because our distance learning program is as fluid as it is. We're really talking about total cases within our population. And so some people might say, well, you're skewing the data, you're adding more cases than you need to. Other people may say that, no, you absolutely should include them. As of right now, our approach has been, if they're our kid or our staff member, if they test positive, we include them in our account based on the building they're assigned.
Thank you.
Yep. And so what I want to do is I'm going to share my screen again. And what I'm going to share with you is this is what was shared with the board last week, is using our existing matrix and based on last Wednesday's counts. So again, This hasn't been updated because we don't have the new counts, and we won't have the new counts until Wednesday. But based on the existing matrix, if the board makes no changes to the existing matrix, where I would anticipate we would be, because it doesn't look like it's getting any better at the county level. It's not like all of a sudden since last Wednesday we've just had this total drop in cases. I mean, it's been pretty consistently higher. You can see where every building would be based on the existing matrix. Our burden rate would be over 51, or it would be 51, and the burden rate, just to explain to people, we've broken it down per 10,000, but the county or the state gives it to us per 100,000. So it was 510 per 100,000. We divided by 10, that gives us our 51. You can see where we would be. Every building, and I think this is what is important for people to understand, is each building is looked at individually. Although they all happen to be in the same spot on any given, with this example, we do look at every building individually. So one building could be in one box and another building could be in another box based on what's happening in the building. But because of where everybody is based on the matrix and what's going on, as you can see, if there is no change, it would push early childhood, the 4K through 6 plus 9 into a hybrid model starting next Monday. And it would push our 7th and 8th grade and our 10th through 12th grade into completely virtual. And, one of the concerns that I have about this is because we would be completely reliant at that point on county numbers, because we don't have any ability under the existing matrix to come back out of that until the county numbers drop, because the county numbers are as high as they are. And so, as we've talked, we have buildings that have only had 1 or 2 cases in 8 weeks. And to all of a sudden, send that building into hybrid, I think is a little bit concerning. Do I have concern about the county numbers? I absolutely have concern about the county numbers. And I think it's something that we definitely need to watch closely. I don't think that we can just say, no, we're not going to, look at the county numbers or anything like that. But with the existing matrix, again, we just didn't envision this type of situation, because again, when we were creating this thing at the end of July, first part of August, it wasn't the data we had. So what I'm going to do here is,
Mr. President,
Yes.
before we go on, Nick, can I just ask you a question about the original matrix? Can you remind us where did that initial 50 plus burden number come from? Is that something that was CDC recommended, or what was the genesis of 50 being the top of that? And I ask because as we look across the state of Wisconsin, we're topping out over 50, but if you look over toward Green Bay, Appleton, I mean, they're at 175, 185 per 10,000. So where did the 50 come from?
Yep, you bet. And so, so originally when we were trying to figure out something to utilize, and this summer we were getting nothing from Wisconsin, as far as statewide, we looked across the river at what Minnesota was looking at doing, and they had kind of come up with this 10, 0 to 10, 11 to 20. They came up with this kind of this model, and so what we did is we tried to take some of their recommendations and then add a component to what is actually happening in the buildings, and so that's where we got the original county numbers, or the county thresholds. And now I will tell you that because we wanted to add a component to what was happening in the buildings, what we were doing at each of those thresholds didn't exactly align with what Minnesota was doing in those same thresholds. But that's where we originally had gotten that from. And so again, people say, well, what is the unlimited or what is the the go-to or the scientific do this and do that. It's us putting together our best, what we think is our best approach to try to keep our kids and our staff, safe, but also to make sure that we're trying to, keep education going as best we can. Other questions before I go into what the proposed matrix looks like?
President.
Yes, Rob's got a question.
So Nick, I want to build off something or a statement Bruce made just a little while ago with regards to students being at home, working virtually, and having a COVID affect them. Do you have an opinion as to whether or not our students are safer in school or safer at home? Do you have an opinion, or is there additional information you have in that, something along those lines?
You know, it'd be truly just that, an opinion. It wouldn't be something that I could say, hey, I have, you know, great data to be able to say this or that. I would tell you that the one thing I do know is that when our kids are in school, we are, to the best of our ability, trying to ensure that they're wearing masks, that they're social distancing, they're washing hands. And that, you know, what we've seen up to this point is that the spread as it relates to kids in the schools has not been because Johnny, third period English, has tested positive, and now the 3 kids around him have tested positive. It has been when there has been connection related to close contacts, it's usually been because of extended time kids have been together outside of school in social settings and or primarily related to household connections and things like that. So whether it's safer at school or safer at home, I don't know. I can't tell you one way or the other. I mean, I can tell you this, and we've talked about this from the very beginning. Our schools are more than just learning. It's more than just the curriculum piece or the instructional piece. Our schools a lot of times provide a respite for kids from their home environment. Our schools provide social and emotional help. Our schools provide meals. Our schools do a lot of things, and our teachers do a lot of things, and our staff do a lot of things. And so, you know, one of the things that we saw when we did totally close down in the spring is a lot of those things go by the wayside. It's not that we don't try to do those things. It's just not the same, as we've all experienced that. You know, you don't get that human interaction as we're doing these meetings via Zoom and things like that. And so, yeah, I don't, I can't tell you that if you do this, this will be safer. If you do this, this will be safer. What I can tell you is, you know, we're trying our best to take in all of the variables and, you know, and as I've told the board multiple times, if my only job in this world was to make decisions based on how do you stop the spread of COVID and didn't have to take into account the impact it may or may not have on kids and their educational progress or their social emotional well-being or the fact that they may be food insecure, then yeah, these decisions look pretty darn easy. The problem is we still have to weigh those factors, and we don't get to make these decisions in a vacuum, and they are very real impacts to kids' lives. Not that COVID's not that getting COVID is not a serious thing or that it can't be dangerous. It absolutely can be, but we do have to weigh all those factors.
Bruce has a question.
Thanks. Nick, you know, I think sometimes we get caught up in the numbers, you know, when we talk a lot about numbers and what's happening in our county, and clearly an important data point for us to be aware of. But also I think about the mitigation plans that we put in place as a district, right? Like a business or, you know, any other operation is going to think about how are we going to keep our employees safe, our patrons safe, whatever it may be. We've invested a great deal in the district in plexiglass. We have invested a great deal in, you know, cleaning supplies and processes and protocols for, you know, daily cleaning, when we clean, how much we clean during the day. Can you maybe speak to some of those? Because we've talked about that a lot, I think, earlier on, but maybe just to kind of reiterate some of the things that we've done within our schools to put the mitigation plans in place that have, I think, contributed to the low numbers that we do have as a district.
Yeah, I think those are great points, Bruce. I mean, we have invested heavily in cleaning and adding additional staff to help clean. We have invested heavily in plexiglass dividers and also ensuring that kids wear masks and socially distance. I mean, there is no perfect solution to this stuff. I do believe that, our mitigation methods are helping. But there's no guarantee that they're gonna, be perfect. And, what we tried to do is, to the best of our ability, if there were areas where we couldn't follow different recommendations to a T, we tried to look at other ways to mitigate our risks associated with that. So like, for example, you might have a CDC recommendation to have everybody eat in their classrooms. Well, that's just not realistic for us at the high school, middle school, or even at the elementaries. So what we did is, invested in plexiglass so that when kids do have their mask off and they're eating, there's some type of physical barrier still between the kids, and things along those lines. We have spent north of, we're definitely into at least 7 figures in our mitigation strategies. So we're well over $1 million in mitigation strategies, and trying to make sure that we can keep the buildings open. Yeah, the plexiglass, we've increased sub pay to make sure we have more staffing available to us. We've I know teachers have done an outstanding job getting kids to be more conscious of what they're doing and washing hands, especially at the elementaries. Trying to space kids out to the best of our ability. Can we guarantee 6 feet all the time, all day long? No, we can't. We've never been able to guarantee that. However, teachers have done a really great job, and staff have done a really great job doing the best they can through that. And I think that's been a big piece of it. And so, yeah, we take it very serious, and we obviously want to do everything we can, but we also know that there are certain things we just aren't able to do based on the CDC recommendations. And we just don't have the ability to do those things and still operate.
Thank you.
Yep.
So Nick, so you have a recommendation then from administration, whereas at our last meeting, there was, I think, 4 proposals in addition to continuing the existing. And as a result, we ended up with no motion to make any adjustments to the matrix other than possibly 7, 8, and the grades 7 and 8 moving to be included with K through 6. But now you have one recommendation. So if you would explain that, please.
Yep. So can everybody see my screen? Hopefully it has a revised matrix. So a couple things on here. I want to highlight, again, this is based on last Wednesday's numbers. So I don't want people to get confused and think that this is what the matrix is, this is what the published matrix is going to look like on this coming Wednesday. I don't have any reason to believe it's going to look a whole lot different, to be quite honest with you, as far as the county numbers. It may look a little bit worse related to the county numbers, but not necessarily. I don't think it's going to look much better. I think the other thing that I think is important for people to understand about the school closure matrix is, I think for the foreseeable future, you think about, we're probably going to be operating in the right 3 columns in each one of these matrix, if people understand what I'm saying. So I don't know if you can see my mouse on the screen. Can you guys see my mouse when I move it around? Okay. So basically, yeah. So basically, I don't see us anytime in the foreseeable future moving out of this area. I think this is a dream if we think we're ever going to be in this area related to the county numbers. I just don't, there's no indication that they're going to go down to that level. Now they very well could, but just right now, I think we're basically operating in the right 3 columns. And so with that being said, we made some changes to the matrix. On the top, we still have the county numbers still cap off at 50 plus on the far right. But the biggest difference is, instead of that being orange, where 10 through 12 goes virtual, it allows the 10 through 12 to stay in a hybrid model, as long as the numbers in the buildings are not growing, and working through that. And so I just think that's something to keep in mind. If we start to have huge spikes in the buildings, it will throw us into virtual, or it will throw us into hybrid with the different buildings. And it's also not a one size fits all. I think the other thing people have to understand is the recommended changes to the matrix don't bring us all back. We're not doing these recommended changes to bring everybody back to school. In this recommendation, it does have 7th and 8th grade coming back full time, because we just have not seen a ton of cases at the middle school. We have had a few more cases over the weekend at the middle school, but for the most part, we have not seen a lot of cases at the middle school. And so this matrix does regroup the grade grouping. So basically it's early childhood through 9th grade versus, and then it's 10 through 12 are kind of their own thing. So as you look at this, we're really looking at, the different groupings. We think that this gives us the most flexibility. It doesn't look like, I said, we'll be pulling out of hybrid. Even with this matrix, we wouldn't be pulling out of the hybrid at the high school anytime soon. I mean, it's going to take a drastic reduction in our county numbers to see us get into this area right here. I mean, it just doesn't look like it's going to happen. I mean, so if anything, the high school is going to stay in hybrid, but if we start to see a bunch of cases at the high school, it could very easily kick into virtual under this matrix.
Right, Nick, you've explained, the numbers across the top, how they change because the groupings are a little bit different. Instead of, 0 to 20 in the first column, it's 0 to 15 and then 16 to 30, et cetera. So you've explained that, but then now explain how the numbers going up and down for the individual buildings. We were seeing it expressed in terms of percentages, and now it looks like we've got case counts.
Yep. I'm glad you brought that up. So on the left-hand side, we've gone to cumulative case count. So this is number of new cases in each of the buildings over the last 14 days. And so this happened to be the cumulative case count from 10/7 to 10/21, essentially at all of the buildings. And I will say there is an error on that first box. The circle should be one box lower because it is. There is 11 cases. The number that's in the blue on each one of these is the number of cases that we've had in that building for the last 14 days. When you look at where did we come up with these case counts, you say, well, where are these numbers? What did you use for rationale? At the middle school and high school, what we looked at is, okay, how many cases were we having previously? And what was that generating as far as our positive case percentage? And we were kind of looking at, okay, how do we half that, and how many cases would it take to do that? And so at the high school and the middle school, these are in basically 0.5% increments. So at the high school, it's roughly 10 student increments, or persons increments as you go through. At the middle school, there's 7-person increments. And then the elementaries are based on their enrollments as well. So for example, EP Rock's a little bit larger elementary. It's in 5-person increments versus North Hudson's in 3-person increments, Prairie's in 6-person increments as you go through. And so that's at the elementaries, it's based on 1% of the population in the buildings completely as we're looking at those things. One of the things people say, why are you going 1% at the elementaries versus 0.5% at the middle school, high school? The biggest rationale behind that is at the elementaries, for the most part, we're able to cohort our kids. Kids stay in the same classroom all day long. They're not intermixing all that much. They intermix at recess, and that's probably about it. A little bit at lunch, but whereas at the high school, middle school, you have kids changing classes 8 times a day. So we thought we would, lower that threshold. And some people say, well, do you have scientific evidence that these should be the numbers, that these are going to guarantee you where you need to be? No, I mean, these are our best. This is our best guess of what we think is reasonable based on the first 8 weeks of the school year, based on what other districts are doing. We don't have, to the best of my knowledge, I checked around the area on the Wisconsin side of the river, other than us, River Falls and Prescott. If you look at, with about a 30-mile radius around Hudson, nobody else is doing any type of hybrid instruction. And even us, even Prescott, River Falls, and us, none of them are doing hybrid at the elementary levels. They're still going face-to-face 5 days a week. So, that's kind of gives you the background on some of the numbers. And again, some of this is trial and error. If all of a sudden we feel like, we're starting to see too many cases and we need to adjust some things and make some adjustments. We absolutely will. Some people may argue that, oh, you guys just are going to constantly change the matrix to do what you need it to do. Well, that's not the intent. And, but the intent is, as we get more data, as we get further into the school year, we're making adjustments as we think are reasonable to get things going.
Nick, can you scroll down so we can see the bottom two buildings?
So you can see Holton, this is where I was telling you, not every building is going to be in the same box. It is purely going to be based on case count. So you could have buildings in different boxes based on where they're at. So Holton, for example, if they would have had a 7th case, they would have kicked themselves down into potentially a hybrid model, but yet the other elementaries could have been face-to-face 5 days a week. I think that's the thing people have to understand is this is not an all or nothing. This is really a building level. It's building by building by building. However, every box, for the most part, has 2 different thresholds. It has kind of the K9 and then the 10-12. So when people say, can we have a separate matrix for elementary and a separate matrix for high school? Well, it's already built into the matrix. I mean, unless you decide you want different grade groupings from what's recommended here, that is already built into the matrix.
So, yeah, Rob.
Last time we visited on this topic, I was a no. And, I had a good opportunity to speak with our superintendent, and our 6th grade and our 9th grade they have been face-to-face in a house-like situation. And I have an 8th grader. I know Nick has an 8th grader. Our cases remain low. And I believe our 7th and 8th grade, if it can be done safely, should be back face-to-face. And as such, I'm supportive of this revised matrix.
So basically, just to recap, this is the proposed new matrix has 3 changes total. One is to include 7 and 8 with 6, 9, and the K through 5. The number 2 is to shift a little bit the columns as they go down from on the county numbers, but still keeping the 5th column over being 50 plus. And the 3rd change is to go to case numbers, building sensitive, depending on the level of learning and so forth. And in my view, that's kind of the key to this, and seems to be what was the original intent when this subject was raised back 2 months ago, was to try and have some balance, if you will, between county numbers and what's going on in the building, but we really didn't have anything to gauge it on, and we knew it was going to be trial and error. And so for us to be here, and Heather's pointed out now on the eastern side of the state, there's school districts that are, 3 times what, case counts we have in St. Croix County. And knowing the examples that you cited, those buildings are at least probably virtual or a hybrid, I imagine, in those school districts. So this may not be the last adjustment that we do, but again, trying to make it a little bit more building sensitive, because I saw a lot of injustice in shutting down Rivercrest for no cases at all for whatever it's been, 5-6 weeks. And just because of county numbers, I don't think is fair. And so anyway, this is the recommendation of the administration. Is there a motion to adopt?
So moved.
Second.
All right, there's a motion, a second. Now we can open it up to further discussion from board members.
Mr. President.
Yes.
I want a clarifying question, Nick.
Mhm.
So if we remain with the original matrix, you're saying that next week we have to go to all virtual?
No, what I'm saying is if we stay with the original matrix, 7th and 8th grade will go completely virtual, 10 through 12 will go completely virtual, and the elementaries plus 6th grade and 9th grade will go into a hybrid.
If we stick with the original matrix.
Correct.
Mr. President.
Yes, Bob.
I would agree with Rob and Jamie. Like Rob last meeting, I was hesitant to send the middle school back just because they had just been out on hybrid for 2 weeks, and I didn't want to leapfrog back and forth. And but I think this is obviously we do have to adjust some of these numbers. And
Stop screen share.
one of my
Nick, are you going to stop your screen share?
Yeah.
I also wanted to just mention that obviously teachers would rather have kids in school as long as we have enough teachers to teach them. And elementary is a concern of mine. Going hybrid in elementary, I think would be a huge burden on staff, parents. If we can keep consistency there safely, I would really hope for that, to keep elementary face-to-face.
Bruce?
Just, yeah, I mean, I had this stance last time as well. I think we need to continue to keep our kids in school as long as we can. I believe that we have an opportunity for those that don't feel safe. If you don't feel safe, we do have an opportunity for kids to opt into distance learning. So there is that choice that's there. I think that the mitigation plans that we put in place are safe practices and protocols for our staff. And, the staff certainly appreciate the concern. It's been there, since the pandemic started. It's not going to leave us until the pandemic's behind us. I think all of us continue to share that concern, as do all those that have a job today, that have to go into an office or a factory or a hospital, or a school. But these are all things that, again, put the right practices in place, the right safety measures in place, and then be diligent about those, right? And I think that's critical for us to continue to remain diligent here as we move forward through the school year, because it's going to allow us to keep kids in school longer. It's going to allow kids to participate in sports longer, band, choir, all the other extracurricular activities that provide additional mental stability and another outlet. So I hope that we can continue to practice the safe practices that we've put in place, but also let's keep the kids in school.
All right, Heather.
So I know what's frustrating for all of us is, and Nick alluded to this, that there isn't a for sure model that we can lean on. I also know, because I've had a chance to talk with a few of you here tonight, that we've been looking for research, looking for information that could help guide these decisions. When we met 2 weeks ago, I spoke about being very concerned about, yes, our kids and staff, and that's our primary consideration, is the safety of our kids and staff. I also think that we have an obligation to think about the safety of our community. So let's not think about that part. I spoke last time about being concerned about the extent to which, even with low numbers, our kids might contribute to community spread. So I was pleased last week to see, and I know it was on the shared document, so I hope you all had a chance to look at it, that there were some studies released on the 22nd that indicated from research that it appears that children up to age 12 do not appear to be playing a role in community spread. We also saw earlier, after spring break, et cetera, that college students do play a role in community spread. The big question mark is adolescence. That's where they aren't yet sure about the role to which adolescents, so we're talking about middle and high schoolers, are playing a role in community spread. So I come into this meeting feeling a lot more comfortable, with the idea that we're going to leave our elementary school kids in-person instruction. I think, if we're going to lean on research and experts to make decisions, which I think we should do, It was reassuring to see that because of the challenges that we've talked about, both from an educational standpoint, but also the impact on those families, many of whom don't have a parent who can be there to be by their kid's side all day long as they're trying to distance learn or have technology or whatever. So I think leaning on that research and making a decision to adopt a matrix that keeps those elementary kids in school as long as possible, putting more weight on those school numbers, I feel more comfortable with that. I am still uncomfortable with middle and high school. Nick, you alluded to the fact, why is the 1% different than the 0.5%? It's because of the extent to which these kids move around. And the middle schoolers are lumped with the high schoolers. These kids move around, and they don't just move around in school more, they move around outside of school more. And so, I mean, I lean toward thinking that we should be looking at keeping our early learners in school as long as possible and taking advantage of hybrid. What hybrid does is it creates space for social distancing while kids are in school. Because without these kids are not 6 feet apart in the classrooms, and they're moving around their classrooms, their buildings, and their communities. So I lean toward thinking we should be having middle and high schoolers in hybrid. And I even wonder at this point, given the fact that they've had 2 months, if it still makes sense to have 9th graders, as an example, in school all day, or if that's something that we should consider as a hybrid as well. But again, I think when we make decisions, I think we need to be able to show that we're leaning on the research that's there. I think with the elementary decision, I feel comfortable with that because of the research that's there. I'm much less comfortable with our adolescent students, our middle and high school learners, because we just don't know the extent to which they are contributing to community spread. And, you know, we got some emails today. We got emails from folks on both sides of the equation, if you will. And I get it. And I want to acknowledge, we got emails from several students who talked about how hard this is. And I just want you to know that we aren't just thinking about this physical health outcome, this COVID outcome. I mean, we're looking at the data on the mental health impact of kids. I see that with my own kids. We're looking at the data around the impact on kids when they don't get to participate in extracurriculars. You know, we're thinking about the impact on families. So we are considering all those aspects that folks wrote about. And so my belief is that by using a hybrid model with those middle and high school students, that we are giving them the best shot at having not just winter sports, but spring sports, because we're going to create that space for them to be socially distanced in school. I think Nick mentioned earlier that our close contacts have decreased since we went to hybrid model. I'd like to believe that's because we're spreading kids out. And I hope that those students and their families are going to take that same mindset and think about that when they're outside of school as well. Because you're right, we don't control them there. But what we can do in school is try and adopt a model that keeps kids, enables us to, as much as possible, you know, comply with those recommended mitigation strategies, including that social distancing.
Sue had a
Just one more
question.
quick question for Nick. So Nick, so 7th and 8th will become hybrid. Is that correct on this model?
No, in this model, 7th and 8th grade would come back to school full time. They are currently hybrid.
Face to face,
Yeah,
which they are doing right now.
No, they're hybrid now.
hybrid.
Oh, are they? Okay.
Yep.
Okay. And then I forgot what my other question is, but we will be revisiting the metric at each of our meetings, right? I mean, if we decide to do this tonight, we'll be revisiting again. I mean, we're always looking at this, right?
Yep. We're always looking at it, and you know, and you know, it's one of those things where administratively, it's kind of like we didn't come to the board the very first, you know, after the very first meeting and say, hey, we need to change the matrix. You know, I think we'll revisit it, because I think, you know, what we owe the public and obviously the board is say, okay, based on these changes, this is what we're seeing, you know, and we're in a good spot. So I think, you know, the other piece that the approach that we've taken, which is a little different than some districts, where some districts you're hearing, you know, they're saying, well, we're committing to virtual until January 22nd. And what we've said is we're really looking at 2-week chunks of time, you know, so if all of a sudden, with bringing 7th and 8th grade back, we start to see a spike in the middle school, or we start to see more cases in the middle school, then yeah, as a board, you could come back and say, you know what, you know, we gave that a shot. It didn't work out. It didn't work the way we thought it would work. Let's put them back let's put them back in with 10 through 12 type of thing. So you always have that ability to do that. So
I know what my other question was is, so if a student still wants to do independent distance learning, they still can do that. And do we have any idea what percentage are doing that right now?
It'd be a question for
No.
Dave that would know the ones that have chosen IDL versus the hybrid. They do.
Yeah, I can find out for you. I don't have that, Ed.
Thanks.
Rob?
Just a comment or two, I guess, to Heather's point. You know, I was like you, if you will, from a thinking standpoint at our last meeting. And where I've gotten to over since our last meeting to today is really thinking about the 9th grade class, and whether was an experiment or not, being a grade beyond our middle school and moving around with all the potential issues that might come of that, and to see that the cases haven't risen in the 9th grade, it would stand to reason. And again, no one here is a medical doctor. I haven't read everything there is. The only thing that I have personally is to look at that 9th grade class and to see that they're functioning well. The cases are low. They're moving around considerably, and it's important socially, academically, physically to be together. And the other thing that I guess I'm challenged with a little bit is that because our children need that social interaction, if they're not getting it during the day in school when they're wearing masks and being protected and what have you, they're going to get it afterwards, more so, without the masks and going downtown and going to other places. One would argue that they're probably still going to go and do those things, but to that great extent, I would argue probably not. And so, again, I was like you last time, and I feel more comfortable with my own kids being with the way the matrix is, the revised one. That's just me personally, but I just thought I'd make a comment.
Okay. Carrie, did you have a comment?
Yes, I would say I'm probably in a minority in the room here, but at a minimum, I would suggest we adopt the administration's recommendation. I don't think that our distance learners should be factored into the building counts. As we look at each school, it would seem reasonable that the case numbers would be those physically present of staff or students. My personal belief would be that 10 through 12 should be in person as well, but with the county numbers or the community numbers should be further out on the spectrum. I don't know why, if the community count is 0 to 15, why it would be safe to have up to 30 in the high school and still have everyone face to face, whereas right now we're at 11, and in this model they can't be face to face. So at a minimum, I'm supportive of the recommendation. And particularly, it seems to be penalizing the high school, previously the middle school as well. But if the high school and middle school percentages are at 0.5%, and they have to go to hybrid so much sooner, I think it's unduly penalizing in this model only the 10 through 12 students.
Okay. Other comments, questions? I guess my thoughts, I appreciate what Heather is saying, and I just wanted to say that I thought she did take some undue heat in those emails that we got, because I know where Heather's heart is, and she's trying to do what's safe for our kids and our staff and our community, as a whole. And and we have gotten emails on this, and in fact, I know the number is over 650. I started reading them, and I still have 599 unread ones. and it's growing. I think I'll just see here. Now I got just one from my doctor, who sent me a personal email. He has my, and I got one from 2 Rotarians, and I got ones from 3 clients at my law firm that know that I'm on the school board. It's not just people on both sides. It is overwhelming that the community wants to see, especially our elementary kids, face to face. I'm impressed though with the emails that talk about, let's at least keep the hybrid model. They recognize that there's some danger with high county counts. And I just don't know. I'm kind of with Carrie on this. I don't know if our grid goes far enough out. I think 50 plus, maybe we should be rethinking that number, but that's not what we're debating tonight. We can look at that later as we need to. Again, to be consistent, I'm concerned about the case counts and affecting kids' learning based on what's happening in their building. Recognizing that because Holton had a bad stretch here 4 weeks ago on their case count, it impacts the fact that they might go hybrid faster than the other elementaries. But as we get further out from those new counts and beyond that 14-day average, they're going to come back in line with the Rivercrest, who haven't had any cases in 4 weeks or 6 weeks. When this proposed metric came out middle of last week or late last week, when us board members first looked at it, and what was true then was we had 1 case in the middle school, and that's why I felt very strongly about including the 7-8 in-person instruction. And we have a superintendent and a board member that have 8th graders. Now that number, went to 5 over the weekend, I'm just questioning, Rob and Nick. I mean, do you feel just as well about including 7th and 8th graders? I realize that we are getting more sensitive. We're going down to that 0.5%. And so it's a number of less than 8 cases. So 7 or less, and we stay in that top tier. Are you comfortable bringing 7th and 8th back 5 days a week, given that we had 5 cases over the weekend reported?
Mr. President.
Yes.
To be honest with you, last time I struggled, and this time, just looking at what's happening in Holton, just as a for instance, I think the district's doing everything it can to monitor things, and if things need to change, then certainly we'll go back to hybrid. And Nick will tell you, I asked him this when he and I last talked. I mean, he has a son in 8th grade, and I asked him, are you comfortable with this? And he didn't hesitate and said yes. And so if Nick feels good, I feel good.
All right. Nick, do you have anything to say on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as we look at these proposed changes.
You're soft again. I don't know if we can up that,
Okay.
get a little closer to the.
Hold on. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. I think, as we look at these proposed changes, I mean, does it always give me a sense of pause anytime we make a change in anything? Absolutely it does. I can tell you that everything that we're doing and recommending, as Rob said, I have 3 kids in the district. It's not anything I'm asking people to do with their own kids that I wouldn't do with my own children. But yeah, I mean, is it nerve wracking? Is it a challenging thing? Absolutely it is. And, do I worry about our staff every day? And I think sometimes people will say, well, you must not care about staff if you're willing to keep changing the matrix. And I do care about staff, and I do care about kids. And these are the decisions that keep you up at night. I mean, they're not easy. And, every time I hear we have a staff member that's sick, and maybe not doing as well as we'd like. Yeah. I mean, it breaks my heart. And the same thing with kids. And I also, it's the same thing as it relates to kids and not having, kids in school, or hearing that, they really want to be here and they can't be. I mean, it is a challenge. I mean, we don't take these recommendations lightly. I know our staff is doing everything they can possibly do right now to educate the kids of our district. We are asking more out of our staff, more out of our teachers, more out of our administrators, our paras, our custodians, our bus drivers, more out of everybody than we've ever asked before. And So I don't take these recommendations lightly. But in my opinion, I believe that this recommendation puts us in the best situation to try to balance all the needs, both that with the community, that with the needs of the kids, and that with the needs of the district. And so, as I said, this is the recommendation.
All right. Any other comments or questions about that?
Just one more, Jamie.
Yes, Bob.
And this is not to do with this motion, but as far as the technology aspect of it, Nick mentioned that we may be in hybrid for a long period of time, and I'm not getting complaints from parents that we are in hybrid in the high school. But with that, he also mentioned that, these Chromebooks we bought were not necessarily designed to stream like we're asking them to stream. And so my question would be, I hope we're with this hybrid, knowing we may be in it for a long time, maybe the rest of the year. Are we comfortable with the support with IT, and are we making improvements? Are we still, are we staying on top of that to make parents and students' lives easier as we go forward?
Well, and I know Dave's going to respond to the actual question, but I just want to say our IT department has been outstanding this year. If there's any group that we've tried to put through the paces, it's been IT. And so some of the issues or some of the problems that we've had related to technology, some were they were unforeseen because we didn't realize until we scaled up to a level in which we're trying to implement. And so I want to make sure people understand we couldn't ask any more from our IT department than what they're giving us. Now, it doesn't mean that we don't have room where we can make adjustments and improve, but as far as your specific technical questions, I'll let Dave go ahead and answer that.
Yep. And Nick is absolutely right. The IT department's done an amazing job and very responsive and continuing to adjust. As an example, we're piloting several different microphones because audio was one of the biggest issues we had early on. For the most part, that's been rectified until Nick tonight, and then that kind of spoiled that. But it was going very well. So we're making adjustments, piloting a couple different wireless mics. That's just an example of the way we're going to continue to learn and grow and adjust. One of the biggest challenges we'll have is if we end up in a situation where we have many elementary students at home, just because of the number of devices. That will be a challenge that we need to address. We technically have enough devices according to a survey, but I think that survey was often answered assuming like I have a device at home, so if my kid's at home, I'll be fine. Not necessarily considering what if I have 3 students at home, their 3 children at home at the same time. So there could be additional challenges that we'll have to address, but we stand ready to respond.
Mr. President.
Go ahead.
Might just like to give you an opportunity to maybe address the folks that are watching tonight that you may not be getting back to everyone individually with an email.
Yeah. Yes.
And
I'll just blanket say thank you for your email and your input. Consider your email answered. Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. President?
Yes.
Just like to take a second, our kids have been in this hybrid situation now for, some time. I just want to thank our teachers and staff. Being in hybrid is not easy. There's a lot of extra work that goes into preparing not only for the classroom, but also helping the kids at home, making sure there's no child left behind, so to speak. So I just wanted to say thanks to everybody that's been working with our kids. We couldn't have done this without our team. So thank you.
Yes, Heather.
And just, I think to acknowledge one other thing, I think the vast majority of the emails we got today were telling us not to go 100% virtual. They weren't saying we want to go back to school. A few of them said, in fact, I think that the kids should be back in school, but I think parents had heard a rumor that the vote tonight was going to be to send kids 100% virtual, and they were voicing to let us know they did not think that was a good idea. And so I hope they like what they're hearing, which is there's nobody sitting here saying, I think we should be going 100% virtual right now. I think, we've got these kids in middle school who are 2 weeks into a virtual approach, or 4 weeks in, 2 weeks in, 4 weeks into a virtual approach. So we've had them half and half. We've been providing social distancing. Community rates are going up. We had increased rates. It just sending them back to school seems like a move in the wrong direction to me. And so because of that, I'll be voting against this model, but I do want to stress that I think leaning on the evidence, I feel very comfortable with our elementary students being in person, and I hope that we'll be able to learn from emerging evidence, maybe even invite in someone who could talk with us and folks who are watching about kind of the epidemiological aspects of this and how this is playing out in community, because you know, I have a high school senior. He hates being at home. I want him back in school too. But this concern about not knowing how community spread is working and how even with low middle school rates, how those kids might be contributing to community spread, that's the part that worries me, that later we're gonna look back and realize that we played a role in something that got worse and that we didn't need to. So that's my comment.
Any further comments or?
Well, and Mr. President, we'll be looking at this again in 2 weeks or so, as we always, like we've been doing.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
I
And,
think we should.
and another thing that I think bears repeating or reminding anyway of folks is that when this matrix was adopted, it was one that, you know, Nick's already mentioned, not many schools have this where they put this out there. They're going more by feel. They talk about different data points they're looking at, but it's still a very subjective, more subjective decision. But these, we didn't want this applied also necessarily hard and fast, so that if we're at 11.001 cases, well, that means we're going to have to go to all virtual, depending on which column we're in. I think, you know, we did say to the administration, you know, we hope that this is interpreted with common sense, and Nick has kept the board apprised when the numbers change and the decisions that's being contemplated at the administrative level, whether any particular building is going to be going hybrid or virtual or whatever, that, you know, there's some common sense being applied to this too. But I think that this is a vast improvement in the numbers. And I think that, but if we were to see a particular building have a spike in cases, I think that the community would appreciate that we move that building to whether it's hybrid or virtual, whatever the case may be. And we're doing the right thing for the students and the staff in that situation. But to do this on more county numbers, if we don't take this action tonight, that's what's going to happen is schools are going to be shut down completely to all virtual if we don't make this change. And only because of county numbers. Now, there's also talk, and it's rumor, I know, Nick, you may or may not be able to confirm it. You've talked generally with me about it, that there's hope that the state is going to start reporting numbers by school district rather than county-wide.
Yeah, so, you know, a lot of times people will come with questions. Why isn't there more information out there? Why aren't you presenting more information? You know, we pull our information right off of St. Croix County's website. And really it's just the case count is what we have. They do have a little bit of, since the start of the pandemic, they do have the by age group, but we don't, you know, they don't have a ton of different information. Pierce County has a little bit different website. It has things broken down a little bit different. And then we just pull data right from the state website. You know, one of the things we've been pushing for is, you know, case counts based on school district boundaries. So not necessarily cases in the schools, but positive cases that reside within our school district boundaries. And we've been told that the state is putting that together, and that's going to be on their website here this week. I would tell you, based on our experience over the last few months, you know, don't bet your house on it, you know, kind of thing. I mean, we're hoping that that's the case because that'll give us another data point. I have been asking pretty regularly. We'd like to see you know, more data as it relates to case counts by age, kind of like every week, you know, with the county, and trying to get that data so we can share that. But we just don't have access to that data. A lot of people will say, why aren't you sharing this? You know, River Falls has this presentation. Why don't you guys have this? We just don't have access to some of that data. And so we'll continue to try to push for that and get that done. And it is a balancing act too, with privacy rights. And, you know, we have people that are emailing and calling and wanting to know, you have to tell me who this case was. And it's like, I'm sorry, we just don't have the ability to do that. And it's now my wife even gets calls or emails. Hey, can you find out who this case was? And my wife says, I don't know who the case is. I don't know why you would think that, Nick's going to tell me and then I'm going to tell you. I mean, it's I know it can be frustrating as a parent, but we're doing our best with the information we have. But we think right now our big data points are what's happening in our buildings, what's happening in the county. We are also watching hospitalizations and what that looks like and things like that, and hospital capacities. But again, that data is really hard to gather because even at the county level, it's not really broken down by things that are meaningful for us. I mean, it's just plain, there's 10 people hospitalized with COVID. Well, we don't know if they happen to be in the hospital for something else and they tested positive with COVID, or they're hospitalized because of COVID. It's hard to know and what's happening and capacities. And right now, all we can do is look at the regional thing with hospitalizations on the state webpage because the county doesn't have anything on their webpage that says this is how many open beds we have in the county and this is how many people are hospitalized related to it. So we're kind of stuck with more of a regional look when it comes to hospitalizations and things like that. So.
All right. Any other comments or questions? Otherwise, I'll call for the vote. I'm hearing no opposition. So all those in favor of the motion of approving the recommended changes to the matrix, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say nay. The ayes have it. And we will make those changes and incorporate that for whatever the next announcement is, I guess. We got one more day of counts for this 2-week period, correct? Two more days.
The new matrix will be implemented with Wednesday's counts. So, and I just want to, for the people that are out there watching, and I know we have a lot of people watching, about 500 at this point. Originally we were going to try to send it out by like 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And then the state said, hey, they're going to have their data by 4. And then the last time they didn't have it to us, I think it was like till like 8 o'clock at night. And so it got delayed. So our plan is still to get this out on Wednesday at some point, but we are somewhat at the mercy of when the state publishes their data. They've said it's going to be by 4 o'clock. And if they stick with that, then I think we'll be able to get that out by the end of the workday on Wednesday.
All right. Moving on then, monthly financial update, Tim or Mark? Okay.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Tim. So I'll just jump right in and won't take too long going through this. As a reminder, this is just our monthly update. This is through the month of September. It's going to give you kind of a summary of all of our funds across the district and then go into more detail within the general fund and just kind of give you an idea of where our spend to date is for the year compared to other years. As you'll notice on that last page that has our variances on it, we really are only seeing things related to timing of certain purchases right now that are showing up as a variance, and then a lot of things related to COVID. And I know you talked a little bit in the meeting so far about some of those increases in budgets and expenditures that we're expecting this year. So that's throwing or creating some variances just based on timing of when all those purchases are coming through. If you guys, I won't spend a whole lot more time. I know you all have the opportunity to get this ahead of time. And if you have any questions, you can always shoot Tim an email or myself an email. We'll be glad to get back to you. I'll just open up. If you guys have anything specific you want me to cover, I'll go ahead and do that. But as you can see, mostly just timing things at this point that we'll continue to monitor and watch throughout the year.
Any questions on the first 3 months of the new budgets update, the one that we haven't finally approved yet, but yes. Not hearing any, I guess we're ready to move on to the 2020-2021 compensation. There's a recommendation in there somewhere, but I think we spent a lot of time previously talking about this over the course of 7 months, I guess. So if you want to, who wants to take this one? Is this Andrea?
Yep, I can take it. So yeah, there's a few different documents and we have a few different subsections of the proposal. But as you know, we came last spring and we're originally looking at a potential 1% across the board increase, but then asked to hold for now just because of all the unknowns associated with COVID. So just as a reminder, this is for compensation that goes back to the beginning of July. So the recommendation tonight would be again reflective for contracts effective July 1st, 2020, going through this school year. It'll only be a few short months from now that we'll be looking at the subsequent year as well. So that being all said, what we've done, the first document I think was just pulled up briefly, the comparable data. So based on the board approved comparable districts, we've done a high level analysis of where we fall compared to the comparable districts. And what we saw with respect to the comparable data is that the median across the board is right around 2%. So some of the most recent settlements, like Richmond, I think was on 1.9 for certified, 1.5 for support. We track all of that. We update that as we get the information. And you can see, again, with the median information for support staff is 2.0, certified is 2.1, administration is 2.25, and then assistant directors coordinators is 2.0 as well. So with that being said, we had the board, the recommendation based on our conversations with cabinet, the consensus was to move forward with a 2% recommendation to the board. And I know Tim has some specific information with respect to some of the data on that as well. But that's the overall recommendation for the board approved percentage increase. And we'll get into the specifics later, but I didn't know if Tim wanted to touch about the budgetary impact.
Yeah, I'll just go through that sheet with a lot of numbers on it. So the yellow is the highlighted, and that's the current budget. That was at 1% board approved increase. And if you go across, kind of read that thing across to the right, the effect on all funds is about 410,000. If you continue further again on the right in that second section, we'll also put in the certified adjustments, which is called part 2 of 13,000. And then the proposal for the para adjustments, which is that next column over. And if you go across from there, you can see the difference from the current budget, and you can see what the budget deficit would be under that. I'm going to jump down to the recommendation, which is in green. And as Andrea mentioned, looking at those comparables, that was right hovering around that 2% plus area. So this one has, again, going across, difference from the current budget would be $482,000 approximately. Gets a budget deficit of approximately $621,000. If you remember back when we looked at the budget the last time, our budget version had a deficit of about 1.6 million. So the good news is, with that additional state aid coming in where it was, that brought that deficit down to that 217 up in that first column, or up in that yellow area. But doing the 2% gets it to 621. When we look at fund balance right now, we're sitting in a good spot. Fund balance is about, with this projection, it would be about $23.8 million, which would be 32.6% of expenditures. So it's about 2.6% above the board policy. But as we've talked about before, we think that next biennium is going to be key to go into that financially strong. So I think the good news in this is you could do a 2% and still go into the next biennium very strong with that fund balance that could be used to address any reduction in state aid or revenue limits.
Are you looking for a motion?
I think we take a motion on each item's individual. So I think we take a motion on each item separately.
So the first one would be base increase?
Yep.
Base increase, correct.
Yes, action item tonight because we have to approve the levy. So.
Yes, yep.
I'll make a motion to declare the base increase at 2%.
Is there a second? Oh, Carrie got the second. All right. Motion by Sue, second by Carrie. Now open it up for discussion.
Mr. President,
Yes.
just one question, regardless of whatever the increase is, will they be made whole from July, like on the next
Yes,
paycheck
this is
rather than
Yes, it's,
throughout the
it
year?
would be, yeah, retroactive to July.
And what we've been communicating out is that our goal is to have it be effective with the December 15th pay period. But that, yeah, would be retro back to the beginning of the year.
So they'll get a lump sum at that time, and then the rest of the year would be their normal
Yes,
increase.
right.
Yes.
Thank you.
Good timing in relation to Christmas, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Or Hanukkah or any, holiday there. We want to be fair. All right. So my comment on this would be the recommendation is the 2%. We'd been considering or had a placeholder for 1%, not knowing where things were going to go with COVID. And we didn't know how bad the state would be, how bad off the state would get with its projections and whether it would be cutting aid. And I'm always pleased with your estimates, Tim, when it comes to that. You kind of expect the worst, but hope for the best. And that's kind of, always my philosophy. And here in this case, we were expecting possibly a budget repair bill or something, some bad news to come along here as we set this levy tonight, which is going to impact everyone's taxes. And what makes this 2% more palatable to me is, one, the comparable study to find out that, in fact, if we want to stay competitive with what we're comparing this district to across the various positions, administrative coordinators, certified staff, and support staff, that 2% is what would be needed. That's one. And then number two, the estimate for the state aid that you had out there, again, being conservative, we're getting more than $1 million more in state aid than we were expecting.
Right. Yep.
And so we're not spending that whole 1.2 million. This would be spending about 404,000 of that.
That's correct. Yeah, right. That's correct.
About a third of what the increased aid that we're getting. And then we're banking the rest and keeping the levy proposal the same.
Right. Yep. Levy stays the same. Just taking this out of fund balance, that small amount out of fund balance. And again, going forward, you've got good fund balance going into that next biennium. So.
Yep. That's helpful information. Thank you for that. Yeah. Go ahead, Bob.
So I've been reading a lot on Facebook, a lot in the community about everybody getting reassessed, of course, and the confusion about unless your taxes go up, unless your property value went up, I think it's 32%. They're adjusting the mill rate down, so it's not going to really affect people's property taxes from a city of Hudson aspect. But what we're doing to levy here right now, how will that affect?
So if we just do basically on straight mill rate, because the mill rate's going down 37 cents. If you looked at a $300,000 home, that's about a little over $100 decrease. But again, when they're doing reassessments in the city, that's gonna have an effect on people. We don't have the information. I don't think that any of that information is available until mid to later November. So it's kind of tough for us to be able to say, here's how it's going to affect it. I mean, there's so many different variables. And if you look at the property valuations and how they've gone up, for example, North Hudson at 11%. As we always talk about that, when we take the total levy and then we start to allocate it out to each municipality, if you've got a municipality going up in value, they actually take on a little more of that total levy. The ones that come in lower take on a little less that next year. So there's a lot of variables in here to determine that, but it's a good question.
Mr. President.
Rob.
Did I hear you right, Tim? Did you say that this increase was going to come out of fund balance?
Right. Yeah. So this increase will come out of fund balance. So the levy is at $9.99. It's down. So it's down 37%, which is what we've held to for the last few budget versions.
So if it comes out of fund balance this time, in future budgets, it'll just become part of the mill rate.
It'll become part of the operating budget. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. But again, you're going in, even taking this out of fund balance, you're 2.6% above the upper end of policy. So you're over that by 2.6. So I think it still sets us in a strong position going into a kind of an unknown biennium.
Right. But just for the short term, but longer term, the raise is there.
Right. Yeah.
Ongoing budget. Yep. Okay.
And Sue, did you have a comment? Okay. Carrie?
And Tim, it's going down 37 cents, not 37%, correct?
Did I say percent? I'm sorry.
I think
It's
so.
37 cents.
Maybe not.
It's the mask. It's the mask.
37 cents. Yes. Okay.
But it translates to about 3.57% decrease in the levy, the mill rate.
Yeah.
I got to keep my terms straight. Mill rate's different than total levy. Yes. All right. Any other questions on the motion? Not seeing any. All those in favor of the base rate across the board being 2% for this calendar or budget year, signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed say nay. The ayes have it. Next recommendation would be this certified adjustment part 2. This comes on the heels of us approving part 1. Is that right, Andrea?
That is correct. So the first part, I forewarned you that there'd be the second part. So the second part is specific to the TSS implementation. By creating the adjustments that we did with part 1, the unintended consequence was that a group of employees who had been placed at Pro 2 or Pro 3 at TSS 1.0 wouldn't receive the full benefit of that placement by creating these tiered floors of the 45, 47, 49, 51 for BAs, for example. Instead, I mean, some people received 0 of that 2,500 or 6,500. It was really the 2,500 amount. But then varying degrees, which is reflected in that far right-hand column there. So this proposal would essentially let them have a do-over. So even though the SAIs, which is what we call it, and I know it's a lot of lingo here, but the SAIs under TSS 2.0, standard advancement increase, is usually a one-time only increase, base building increase. We would let them do it again because of the modification that was approved with part 1. So we aren't wanting to treat them negatively or have a negative, unintended negative consequence for those floors. And so essentially let them try for it again with this next round of TSS placements over the next 3 years. And as you guys know, with educator effectiveness, we place staff over this 3-year period. And so it would be a 3-year implementation cost. And so looking at that, it would be approximately the $13,000 a year. I have all the specific calculations labeled down or identified below with, again, 29 staff members impacted by this. Just wanted to make sure that with the understanding of my goal has always been first, do no harm. This is a group that I was concerned about with part 1 if we don't also address this as part 2. I have the specific example laid out here too. That I can certainly go into in detail, but I know it's also part of your memorandum. So I'm happy to answer questions as it pertains to part 2.
Yes, Heather.
So Andrea, without going completely into the weeds, while reading this, your head starts to hurt a little bit and you start to wonder, is this a snowball going downhill? I mean, so is part 2 the end? Or then does part 2 create another group for which then we have to think about part 3? Like how much of a snowball is this?
Totally understand that. And I think the proposals on both part 1 and part 2 haven't been overly ambitious. We're trying to create some relatively modest floors. And looking at every single staff member, when we're doing this analysis, we've looked at every single certified staff member, that I feel that the bands that have been created with these adjustments of part 1 and part 2 put us in a position that I believe this period can be put behind us. As I said, with these adjustments, Will it make everybody happy? Nope. Will there continue to be inequities? Yes, there will be, because we've had so many different systems in place for the past 7+ years. That being said, I believe those at the lowest end are being addressed with this proposal. I believe that we have a lot of upward escalation at the top end that we've tried to address with TSS 2.0 with some of the caps. There will be continuing issues with those that got, a master's degree at with 5,000 instead of 1,750 or instead of 3,000. There's going to be continuing issues. There's going to be continuing disparities internally, but this addresses the low end of those disparities in a way that I think is really important. Some of it will just be here because of the different systems that have been in play over the past almost 10 years now. And that's just a function of where we're at. But again, I believe these address the most significant outliers in a meaningful way.
Great, thank you.
And so we've got two numbers here, one that addresses the bachelor's proposal is 8,438, and then the master's 23,821 for a total cost of 32,259, and that's for this budget year only. Is that correct?
No, and that number is a little tough. That's why I put the calculations down below, because that just shows how they were as compared to the floors.
Okay.
So the real impact is, again, that 13,413 per year as a maximum cost, because that also assumes that they can get distinguished standards in multiple ratings or in multiple standards.
Okay, so at worst it'll be 40,000, but it could be something less, and it could be 32, it could be 33, it could be 29.
It could, yes, exactly. It could be a variety of numbers depending upon how many standards they get, which is what has made it complicated. Because our proposal is not to just give them additional 2,500, which was the Pro 2 placement under TSS 1.0. It's not to do that, because that would be, significant cost. Instead, our compromise is looking at what we continue to value in TSS 2.0, which is the 750 per distinguished standard, and utilizing layering that on top of the inequities when it comes to this particular area, which I know when I started talking to the principal group about this as well, there's the SAI, there's the EPI, there's a lot of different lingo that goes along with this. But I'm also confident that I can go to the talk to individual staff members, lay out my analysis and explain the whys behind each of these recommendations. And that's what I would plan to do. I've already been talking to the principals, is that if the board would approve this, I would be more than willing, as I have in the past, to go to each building and talk to individual teachers about why they are not in this group, and show the data to support it.
All right, is there a motion?
Move to approve the plan as presented.
Second.
Oh,
All right,
I'll
Rob
give
got it.
I'll give it to Rob.
All right, Carrie's motion, Rob got the second. Any further discussion or questions? All right, hearing none, all those in favor of adopting the motion as recommended by administration, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say nay. The motion passes, and the adjustment will be made for that group. Next up is the center-based special ed paraprofessional rate. Who's addressing that?
I am, again, this one will be relatively quickly, because I believe that this is beyond called for. I think that this is an area where, and I tried to lay it out in my memo, that $1 per hour increase for one-to-one paras, one-to-one special education paras, as well as the center-based program, is more than called for, because we consistently have unfilled vacancies where we post for jobs in these areas and we cannot fill them. So I put in here at the end that since the beginning of the school year, we've had 17 different hirings of these type of positions. We still have 4 more vacant positions, and we're almost done with October. So these are needs that are not we're not where we're at when it comes to staffing here. We believe it is critical to differentiate between our special ed paras and then this higher level one-to-one para and center-based para positions.
Okay, and I was just doing round math real fast, but there's about 21 positions we're talking about because you've filled 17 and 4 are still vacant, correct?
And that was just what we were filling, because we do have a lot of people that come over from year to year that are continuing employees. Tim has the specific numbers when it comes to those impacted as well as the budgetary dollars.
Yeah, so we have, so that 65,000, when you looked at that other sheet with the yellow and the green on it, that's the total cost of this annually. About 43 people impacted, I believe, correct, Aaron?
Okay.
So yeah, for the one-to-one and the center-based. And again, yeah, they're positions that Aaron can tell you how difficult they are to fill. It's an ongoing issue for us.
Sure. But this all comes down to an extra $1 an hour translates to the 65,000.
Correct. Yeah, for the 43 people. Yeah.
Okay. And impacting 43 people. Thank you. So it's about 1,500 a position.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So is there a motion?
Move to approve.
Second.
All right. This time Carrie has the motion, Heather second. Any further discussion?
I just would argue in favor of this. I mean, right now we are barely beating Target and Aldi to recruit for these positions. We need to do better than barely beat Target and Aldi if we want to get folks who are going to work with these kids. So I'm very supportive of this motion.
Yes.
I would just say that ever since I've been on this board, this has been a pervasive discussion that Andrea's addressed and so on. And this is such a huge area of need, and we want to be proud in our district that we address all our kids. So I have no problem with the increase.
I just wish we saw Washington DC and Madison paying their share of the extra expenses for special ed, but our local taxpayers have to do it in the interim here. But I think it is much needed and no debate there. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed say nay. The ayes have it and it's approved. And now the last one says recommendation.
I think that was Tim's. I think we've covered it all, though. I think that was just
Right.
kind of a summary of it. Yep.
Okay, very good. So now next up is a budget adoption and levy certification.
All right. So this can be as fast or as long as you want it to be.
I think we'll do the latter or the former, I should say.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It's been a long meeting.
So we've, Mark and I have presented, we set out those different 4 proposals that you saw earlier in a little bit different format, but again, with the recommendation, with the passage of what you just previously approved here, the changes were to salary and benefits, obviously, and the interfund transfer to special education, because that covers salary and benefits for special ed as well. And then food service, about a $10,000 increase or $9,000 increase there. So that, again, that bottom line under that 2% column gets you to a deficit of 620. That'll be taken out of the fund balance. And you can see the other numbers down below that haven't changed. They've remained the same. The projected unassigned fund balance is 23,804 for a percentage of expenditures of 32.58, which is roughly about 4 months of operating expense if we average it out over 12 months. And then again, the mill rate's $9.99, which is a 37-cent decrease, or about 3.5%. The numbers on the next page, the valuations are at getting close to $5 billion in district valuation. It's up 7 and a fraction, so 7.18%. And the levy increase, the total levy, that's both the debt service, the community service, and the general fund, that's increased to 3.37%. And again, mill rate change is down 3.5%. And then down at the bottom, you can see the final valuations for each taxing jurisdiction. And the high is the Village of North Hudson at 11.68. And then the lowest one is Town of Troy at 4.42. So, but we get that average of 7.18, and that's what I was referring to before. So, so then the next page is the resolution that you'd approve. And the data behind that, you're looking at that official document. Again, it's if you go to the pages, if you want to refer to that, it's the one with the 2% in the upper right-hand corner. So that's the detail part of the budget by function that you'll also be approving tonight as normal. So I'll keep it short unless you've got any additional questions.
I'll entertain right now a motion to approve the resolution as stated.
Mr. President,
Yes.
do I need to read it all?
Yes.
Be it resolved that a tax in the total amount of $49,811,272, of which $42,525,846 is general fund, $7,060,426 is debt service fund, $225,000 community services fund. Be and is hereby levied against the taxable property in the Hudson School District for school purposes.
Second.
All right. Motion by Carrie, second by Bob. Further discussion? Again, this is based on, the mill rate that we've been talking about for several months is all based on valuations where they came in, but ultimately that's how it's funded. So based on our property taxes. Any other questions? And it is the first time we've had three categories. Before it was just general fund and debt service, and now
Right.
we've added community service.
That's right. Yep. First time through.
All right. Right. I'm not hearing any questions, so all those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. The ayes have it, and the levy and the budget are adopted. Next up, we have the high school schedule for 21-22. And we discussed this potentiality, but we're talking about an 8-period day. We're not talking about the school year calendar at this point.
Yeah, that is correct. And I have Assistant Principal Josh Halverson with us today. He'll be co-presenting. And just want to give you an overview of the decisions made thus far related to the high school schedule. Before I start, I just want to mention that the one thing you can do that impacts everyone in a school like that is change the schedule. It really is a big deal. It requires a lot of input, a lot of feedback from stakeholders, a lot of conversation. We're at the beginning stages of that. It's a very accelerated process. We're putting a lot of time into this, but there's still a lot that needs to happen. When we close out the presentation, we'll be sharing a timeline, which will include about the next couple months worth of meetings that we'll be visiting with various stakeholders to get their input and make adjustments. But the presentation again is all about going from a 7-period day to an 8-period day. And next slide, please. When we talk about why do we move to an 8-period day, it's all about opportunity. An 8-period day increases opportunity for students. So there's 3 statements there: increased student choice, increased support for students, and increased opportunities for teacher collaboration. Josh is going to go through a couple sample schedules, both the teacher sample schedule and some student sample schedules that will give you an idea of what this would look like if we roll out an 8-period day. And then we're also going to share some of the basic numbers. What would a day look like? How does it compare one year to the next? So you can get a sense of what that would all look like. A couple things about this. This is the first step in a process. This isn't necessarily the end all be all. The first step is to get to 8 periods. Once you get to 8 periods, it's easier to go to different schedules. You sometimes hear the term block schedules, which refers to larger chunks of time. So not switching as many classes during the day, but having larger instructional blocks. Modified block, which is a combination of full blocks and what they often call skinnies, so smaller class schedules. All those are potential eventualities. But right now, the idea is to get to the 8-period day, because then those adjustments can happen subsequently as we learn more. One of the reasons we're focused on an 8-period day, making what I would say is a simpler switch. That word simpler is based on that caveat that I started with. There is no simple change to a high school schedule. It's always complex. But this gets us one step closer to where we want to be. And again, increases opportunity considerably. when we talk about where we'll eventually end up, again, it will always be about maximizing opportunity. And again, a lot of stakeholder input. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Josh, who's going to talk through a couple of the sample schedules. I guess I should have checked technology. Hopefully Josh is just waiting there and ready to start talking. Otherwise I'll keep talking. Josh, you all set?
Can everybody hear me?
Giddy up.
Volume sounds all right. Awesome. Thank you for letting me speak tonight. What you see in front of you is a sample schedule of 3 students. Probably the first thing you have to understand is, what does the day currently look like? We have a 7-period day with advisory. So it is, I guess, on a simple level, adding a period to the current day, adjusting the start and end times of classes to fit that schedule in. Currently, our lunch is split into 3 groups. That was really beneficial this year with COVID and getting our spacing where it needed to be. That's something that we're planning to continue on next year. We did have another committee, though, that's looking at how can we pair lunch and advisory together, but that's not a next year thing. So looking at these 3 students, if you kind of look at student A, this might be an upperclassman. And what looks different about this one is we have a ton of students that use summer school to get through their high school career by getting their kind of FIEDs taken out of the way. So if you look at that 8th hour, that team sports, that kind of tells a story where a kid could actually get that in during the school year, not have to do it during summer school, and still take a really rigorous schedule. Student B would be like a freshman. There is a misprint on here that I will take full credit for. The 8th hour should be English 9. Maybe the student really likes FIED, but he only needs to take that, or she needs to take that once. Here it would be allowing more access to the electives earlier. A lot of our students really don't get a chance to try different avenues of electives until they continue on into their high school career. Student C might be like a sophomore. On this student, we can see that he's receiving some support in geometry. Geometry support is a course we do offer. Students receive an elective credit, not a math credit. It involves pre-teaching, post-teaching, and allows students to have access to a math teacher in an environment where they can be better set up to pass the course. A lot of times when students go into this, right now they have to make a hard decision. A, do they do it, or do they have to give up either a study hall or another elective? So what we currently have is just 7 periods. So you could kind of put your finger over any one of these students' courses, and that might be something they don't have access to if we don't move to this 8-period day. If we can move to the next slide. So a teacher schedule, they work on the same schedule that students do, obviously. Here we're looking at a math teacher and a geometry teacher that teaches also geometry support. The things that we can point out on this one is, if we look at hour 3, that's common planning time. Right now, a teacher only has a common planning time if you're like in the freshman academy. Our math department doesn't have a common planning time. So we talk about PLCs, so our learning communities. Currently, that only happens on Thursday mornings. Right now, we don't do it at all. But that 3rd period block would allow teachers to meet about curriculum, meet about common assessments, and come up with, how do you address if half the class missed problem 7? How are we going to attack that piece? Right now, teachers don't have that guaranteed. The 7th hour would be that teachers prep, and then teachers would be teaching 6 out of 8 on this schedule, and that's what we would expect teachers to teach. If we can go to the next slide. Awesome. So just kind of some information. So kind of comparing what we're currently doing in 2020, 2021. It's a 7-period day. Length of class period is 48 minutes. Teachers teach 5 out of 7. The 6th assignment for a lot of teachers is a study hall. Advisory is only being done 4 days a week. And when we had them, Thursday mornings were the collaboration time. So that would be that PLC time. So what do we gain when we go to an 8-period day? First of all, students have more opportunities. They have 8 opportunities for credits. The time does go down to 41 minutes, but the electives increase. Teachers teach 6 out of 8. Collaboration is embedded, so it's not just something that teachers visit weekly. They can actually visit it daily. And then our advisory, we have more contacts taking place as well. If we can go to the next. So some teacher feedback that we're receiving is our opportunities. It's kind of cool. We've been talking a lot with our department heads, and they're talking about opening up new electives for students, our support and resource opportunities like geometry, math support, English support, our writing center. These are all things that we can look at. Common planning time. And then in some courses, it may make sense to look at smaller class sizes as well. So challenges, there's definitely a decrease in minutes. There's a chance that if you pick up a new course, that might be a new prep for you to teach, or just the overall increasing the number of sections to teach. The potential increase for student stress, and then the potential impact on staffing.
Thank you, Josh. I'll take it from there. And a couple things before we go into the timeline. As I said, big change for everyone involved. A couple things. One, this is not done with the intent of reducing teaching staff. It's done with the intent of increasing opportunity. So there's no design on, there are inherent efficiencies that are gained with an 8-period day, but we're not looking at reducing staffing because of a switch to an 8-period day. We're looking at increasing opportunity. Another thing I want to mention with that potential increase of student stress, first of all these challenges are real. We appreciate the feedback. We need that real feedback from teachers. One thing that we're going to be providing some PD on, and as we look to create new classes, try to address one of the concerns, and that is we want all of our courses to be rigorous, but rigorous doesn't mean difficult. Rigorous doesn't mean that it's full of homework. Rigorous doesn't mean that you're bogged down with a lot of extra things to do. Rigor means personal challenge. It's finding ways for kids to find that personal challenge, whether that's a stretch goal for themselves, whether that is an academic challenge, or whether it's learning a new skill that really feeds them and feeds their passion. Those are the opportunities we're looking for as we expand our electives. Josh coined a term that he's called unmothballing, which I think is a great term. We will be adding classes, and we'll talk about that in the next slide. But the first classes that we will be adding, Bruce is looking at me for soft skills. That'll be the second one. But the first classes we add will be classes that we have on the books that we don't get to offer because there just aren't the slots in the day that allow kids to take them. So they end up getting sort of crossed off the list and we can't complete them. So we can actually increase the electives we have by simply offering courses we've already designed and teachers have already been trained to teach. The other thing is we don't need to immediately create new classes because we have students that select first, second, third choice. Often they don't get that first choice because there isn't a slot available for that course. Now we can get more students into their first choices. We really want the schedule to be driven by student choice. Obviously, we create classes to meet standards, but once those are created, the rest should be up to students other than that the required pathway all the way through to graduation. As Josh had mentioned, the increase is about electives. We're not looking at increasing any core graduation requirement. This gives that opportunity for more either challenge or support. One thing that I wanted to point out as well on the teacher and the student sample schedule, you saw that like geometry support as an example. That is not an open study hall that happens to have a math teacher. that is an avenue to deliver intervention and deliver direct support. That teacher is actually teaching a class of students that have been identified as requiring that support. This is, I think, the piece of the schedule that excites me more than anything is the opportunity to guarantee a student that needs extra support can have that without limiting them from their passion. If there's a student that's banned that gets them to school every day, but they need a little extra help in algebra, now we'll be able to do that. And I think that's a beautiful thing. A beautiful thing with not without its challenges. So let's take a look at the timeline. Obviously getting the update right now. Student council input, October 28th. So going through a process of getting direct feedback right from the students and student council. Then we'll go through that process of new course identification. Again, mostly the unmothballing, using Josh's term. And then we've got student registration and determine the number of sections there from December to January. Bring another update to you February 22nd. At that point, we'll have actual numbers, so we'll be able to put those in front of you. And then one thing that happens every single week, we meet with the high school admin team. So this really is a true collaboration between learning support services. So Aaron is involved, I'm involved, Ivy's involved, Jordan is involved, and the full high school administrative team. I know Principal Ballard wishes he could be here, couldn't be here tonight. We are excited about this, but we know that not all teachers are thrilled about this right now. We will be offering a lot of support. We're going to be offering a lot of opportunities to hear their concerns, address those concerns as best we can, help them understand the direction, but more importantly, just start the process moving forward. And then a lot of the stakeholder input really has implications for the next few steps. How are we going to structure classes? What classes are we going to bring back? What will the FTE be for each individual department? So on and so forth. So a lot of opportunity for teacher input for steps right now. Questions?
Mr. President, one, what is the difference between teaching classes and preps? So is a teacher going to be worried about now having to have more prep? Like one of your examples, they taught geometry 3 times, 3 periods. So that's 1 prep, 3 classes. How do you say, what's the language you use?
That's a really good question, Sue, because the word prep gets used for 2 different things. Sometimes we'll talk about preps, meaning the number of individual classes a teacher needs to prepare for. Otherwise, other times we talk about prep time, or a period that a teacher has to prepare for upcoming instruction. So we don't yet have the data on the number of preps that a teacher will have. We try to keep that as tight as possible, but there's very few situations where a teacher only has 1. We don't see this changing that dramatically, but there could be an impact. As Josh pointed out, the other side of preparation time, this would allow a teacher to have consistent individual prep and consistent team prep through in their schedule, which I think has a ton of value. Right now, everything happens on Thursday morning. That's all the collaborative prep they have. That means with the 3 principals, 2 APs and a principal, if they want to meet with these PLCs, they have to try to do that all on a Thursday morning. When it's embedded throughout the schedule, we can get a lot more support to those teams because it's not all happening at one period throughout the day. There's different teams meeting at different times. So if there's something that needs to be rolled out, or some professional development that happens at the professional learning community, which are the small teams, let's say it might be the art team. They can have an instructional coach or a principal or some other support person right there with them at that meeting, and then that wouldn't take up the entire time.
Okay, I just have one other quick one. So 7 minutes, I think 7 or 8 minutes difference between 7 and
Yeah, seven
periods.
minute difference.
So will you have a discussion with everyone then about the rhythm change? I remember when we went from quarters to semesters, we went to a conference on the rhythm of, going 16 weeks from whatever it was. So 7 minutes really alters how you're gonna do
Yes.
things. So,
Yeah, it absolutely does.
I mean, you don't have to go into detail. I just wanted to know
Yeah,
if you're
but you're
talking
right.
about it.
Yeah, we do need that's probably the most significant level of support we need to offer to teachers, is how to make those adjustments to still get the core guarantees accomplished, and not get completely discombobulated. It's to a non-teacher that might sound like a non-significant amount of time. That's 7 minutes. It really is significant. That's why making the jump to like a block schedule where then you go to 90 minutes or longer is really significant. And you can lose a ton of instruction if you don't properly support teachers with professional learning related going to a block schedule. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I don't know that I necessarily see a downside here. I mean, I think that it's a directionally the right way to go. I'm sure it will be difficult for teachers, you know, to kind of adjust to this. It looks like the plan that you have provides that opportunity. You know, we're not doing this during COVID, right? I mean, we're planning for it during COVID, but we can't stop moving forward. I guess one of my questions is, you know, we are constantly looking at other high performing districts. Are other high performing districts doing 8-period classes? Could you maybe, or days, could you maybe just speak to what other schools are doing that are high performing in this regard?
I can't give you exact current information. We did look at this a few years ago and we looked at our high performing comps. There were very few that were on a 7-period day, much more common to either be on 8 or a modified block. I would say modified block seems to be what many of our high performing comps had, but they moved into that over a number of years. The 7-period day is just challenging because it's tough to, as soon as you run into a situation where a student becomes credit deficient, if they don't pass a class, suddenly their path to graduation looks very, very different from a student who was not credit deficient. That's why most schools have gone to something that allows for 8 instructional periods one way or the other.
Well, and I just think about, you know, the summer school programs for gym particularly, right? For most kids that want to get higher level or higher number of AP courses in. So, you know, I would, you know, I think that was addressed in the discussion earlier. So I think that should be helpful here. I mean, I really see upside. I think it's going to be maybe a little bit of an adjustment, but long term, this has some real potential to provide more exposure to our students for additional learning opportunities. I think it's fantastic.
Thank you.
Rob?
We're looking forward to it as well.
Rob? So 2 questions. The student council input on Wednesday. Is this sort of a one and done? We're going to present it. You're going to have an hour, make whatever gut reactions you have, and that's basically it. Or are they going to have a chance to really noodle what it is you're presenting and then come back later on with thoughts?
So I'm going to speak more generally, and I'll let Josh talk specifically to what's happening, because honestly, I don't know the specifics of what's happening upcoming, but it is a guiding principle of having ongoing, meaningful student input throughout this process. I don't know exactly what that process will look like, but again, we're going to make sure that students and teachers, all staff members, have opportunities to provide ongoing, meaningful feedback. That's why we're meeting on a weekly basis. We don't want to let a week go by where we're not making adjustments based on what we're learning and hearing.
Sure. And it just seems odd that student council input is just on that one date. That's why I was asking. And then from a teacher perspective, certainly it's different, new. Why wouldn't a teacher want to do this? Is it more work? Is it just...
No, it's not about more work. If we go back to the teacher feedback slide, if you can go up, I think it's just one from there. The challenges that are listed, there we go. If we go to, so those are the reasons. Those are the reasons why a teacher would be hesitant. And it's not that teachers are against this. There are teachers that are concerned. There are some teachers that are very excited about it. There are others that are concerned. And when you have a change that's so significant, concern makes sense. It's not something that would surprise us. And this feedback, at one point, we were going through listing the challenges that teachers offered in feedback. And we started wordsmithing it just because you're used to creating a presentation. We realized, well, this is their feedback. So let's keep it exactly how they stated it. So that decreased minutes in each class period. For a teacher that feels they're teaching really, really well from bell to bell, and now they have less time to do that, that will require adjustments. And it's not just like, I'm going to teach 7 minutes less of stuff each day. You start to, your whole scope and sequence gets adjusted. So that requires a lot of time and a lot of energy for the teacher to feel successful and well supported with that. If you have another class to teach, and as Sue said, if that's an additional prep, that's an additional prep, meaning a new class that you didn't previously teach. You used to teach 3 classes, now you have 4. You used to teach 2 classes, now you have 3. That would be a concern. That's a legitimate concern as well. The potential increase of student stress, this is one we've talked about a lot. I'll share an example of a way that we plan on addressing this, and it's not a fix, it's just one way to address it. Our student stress levels is a really significant concern, and it's something we talk about a lot. This is a common conversation for learning support services between student services and teaching and learning. And there are ways we can actually utilize our curriculum to decrease stress. One is to enhance what happens in advisory. Advisory is such an important tool. We need to maximize that benefit. Taking a fresh look offers an opportunity to do that, looking at the schedule. Another is Phi-Ed. By offering more classes, we're going to be offering classes that are specifically designed to reduce stress. Whether we're talking about mindfulness classes, classes that a student could have in the middle of the day, if they want to learn how to self-regulate, it would be a beautiful thing that in the middle of the day, in 5th hour, they go to Phi-Ed, and it's a class on mindfulness and stress management. Those are the sorts of things we want to do to make sure that we're not just trying to avoid the challenges, but we're trying to address the challenges and make them better.
Thank you.
All right. And right now, you're just giving us an update, and you're not looking for a vote or anything like that. Is that something that we would do in February?
Yes, I think in February would be a more appropriate time for that. We're looking for feedback, though, definitely.
Right. Yeah. If we had any strong visceral reactions, but it sounds like you've got a supportive board. Yeah.
Mr. President,
Yes, Carrie.
this does not change the graduation requirement credits, correct?
It actually will, but only in electives. So, and we'll stair step that in. So we'll share that. We have so essentially as new students come in, because they have 8 periods, there would be one more elective opportunity. So it would stair step up. It would still leave a little bit of opening. Reason being, if we don't change it, they'd all graduate halfway through senior year because they'd have met all the requirements because they'd have those classes. So it increases the requirement only for electives.
All right. Anything else?
Yeah, just, and it sounds like you're thinking about this. I'm sure you're thinking about this because you're talking about stress. And I can see where a risk would be, especially for some of our more driven, high performing students who already have 4 AP classes that are going to be just as hard. They're just going to have 7 minutes less. I mean, these are kids who don't take study halls. And so now if they all end up with these packed schedules. And so how do we make sure they're taking advantage of the flexibility, the increased offerings, but also like feel like they can breathe once in a while and it's okay to have a study hall. I mean, so that I think would be a concern too with the driven students that maybe would overload and then realize that it was too much.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I'm glad that you're thinking about all that.
And that's, I'm going to comment on that because it's a very important piece of this puzzle. The Laude system that was presented on last year, and we'll bring an update to that was designed intentionally to change the way we recognize students and their success. So it is not just about the top academic performer, but we cast a wider net and we tap into those student passions and say, you know what, you're being recognized because you're successful, because you followed your path and you found success that way. By doing that and decreasing that idea that the only way to be successful in the Hudson High School is by having 15 AP classes and graduating from college before you graduate from high school, we don't want that to be the only way a student feels successful.
Any other comments or questions? Otherwise, thank you for your report. We look forward to the next report in February. Next up is the rental agreement with Hudson Hockey Association. I don't know, Tim, is this you?
Yes. Yep.
And is this something that you're looking for a vote tonight because we have to get it approved before the next action meeting, or is it just something to be approved in November action meeting?
If you're comfortable with it, it'd be great to approve it tonight. The association board did sign off on the agreement. There's some signed copies, but I'll run through it quickly. The biggest change is we're going from, rather than that 1 year, we went to a 3-year agreement. And so in the middle of the page, you see under 2, the rental rates, we're tying those to CPI, Consumer Price Index, so that we don't wind up in a situation where we're trying to catch up because we didn't have an increase for 7 years. So I think that's going to work out much better than what we've done in the past. Other than that, there really aren't a lot of other changes to it, but it's really getting to that 3-year agreement. So we're not visiting this every single year.
Oh, that makes less work for us then.
Well, it makes it a little smoother, I think. So,
all right. Is there questions on the Hudson hockey rental? Yes. Rob.
So last year when we covered this, there was an issue around alcohol.
Right.
Is there any further conversation on that with this new 3-year agreement?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we had a lot of conversation. You know, and when you look at this, the other under 3C, it talks about only HHA, Hudson Hockey Association members have access to the Zamboni mechanical room. That's about as good as we can get going through that. But we do talk about that. They know it's a concern, and we do try to address that. But this is the language we've got in it.
Okay, Bob.
So again, like before, being connected with the Hockey Association years ago now, being a member of the HHA, it could be a 16-year-old kid who drives the Zamboni, you know, between games. So is there any talk about age of that?
We don't have age in here, but I'm assuming when we talked
discussed
about it,
this
we
before.
talked about adults.
Okay.
Was what we
I
talked
mean,
about.
I know that, and maybe they've changed it, but there used to be, you know, if you were approved and you were, you know, you could be I believe under 18, but whatever, that's fine. I know you can only do what you can do. As long as insurance and everything's okay with everything, that's fine.
Yeah.
Any further questions? Otherwise, I entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
There's a motion to approve, second by Carrie, motion by Bruce. Any further comments or questions? All those in favor of adopting, well, did you have a comment, Bob? Okay, no. All right. Again, it's the mask. I could only see your eyes, so it looked like you were all ready to either say or act on something. All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say nay. The ayes have it, and it's approved. And I think because of the time period, we're going to adjourn our discussion of collective commitments to next month. And I'll entertain a motion to convene.
So moved. Oh, we got to go to. The board will entertain a motion to convene in closed session pursuant to Wisconsin statute 19.85, parent 1, parent C, to consider employee performance evaluation data of an administrative employee.
Second.
There's a motion, a second, requires a roll call vote. Bauman.
Aye.
Brown. Whitaker. Hanson. Loglin. Katas.
Aye.
Johnson. Aye. We stand adjourned to closed session.
So we will, I'll open up the Zoom link.
Are you talking to us, Nick, or are you gonna?
Yes, I'm talking to you. I'll close this Zoom link and I'll open up the new